its history, right? I mean, they're really in a contest. I think the Clinton campaign knows it's in a contest, and Bernie Sanders seems to have a new sort of impetus, a new sort of pep in his step, because the polls show him so close and potentially leading in Iowa and New Hampshire.
And Hillary Clinton, you feel the sense of urgency. She's feeling the sense of urgency. You cue the backseat driving story in the New York Times today, the hand-wringing, Bill Clinton supposedly is saying X and all this stuff. And for about 10 days, they've been trying out a whole bunch of attack lines on Bernie, and I think they're trying to see what's going to stick tonight.
Yeah, you know, remember 8 years ago now, this is a weird year, so we shouldn't draw direct comparisons to any previous year. But one thing that does seem to be similar is that it took a while for the Clintons to figure out how to go after Barack Obama. And they did it in several wrong ways, including here in South Carolina, that really backfired. You saw a bit of that on a much smaller scale, much less damaging, I think, this week, the way they went after Bernie Sanders on health care, an attack by Chelsea Clinton that was roundly criticized and did backfire on the Clinton campaign. So, you know, maybe they will learn from that first misstep and figure out how to go after this guy. They got to do it.
What's been interesting about this debate, you know, the Democratic debates overall have been criticized because they haven't been the Republican debates, because they haven't had the big guy in the room, Donald Trump. And you're right, they had been sort of nice affairs. This one's not nice. All day long there's been gamesmanship. The Hillary Clinton campaign telegraphing that they want to hit Sanders for not having a health care plan. Well, guess what he just put out an hour ago? His health care plan.
Would it be a health care plan?
Yeah, that's quite the little reverse gamesmanship there. Throw her off her stride.
It is. It is. Of course, he did need to put that out. I mean, his health care plan is essentially Medicare for all. There is a big question mark about that. How do you pay for it? And so he had to come out with an explanation, and I guess he has. So we'll see.
We shall see. This is going to be a lot of substance tonight, but I think back and forth substance. All right, let's check in. Kristen Welker, of course, has been following the candidates. She's been talking with the campaigns throughout the day as they get ready for the debate. She joins me now. She's backstage for more on what we should look for tonight. And obviously, Kristen, in the last hour, we've got this issue of Sanders putting out his health care plan. That's certainly got to change some strategy there for Hillary Clinton.
Well, it definitely does, Chuck. The question is how. I am told that the Clinton campaign officials, as we speak, are pouring through the details of his health care plan to determine exactly how Secretary Clinton will respond tonight when she takes the stage. Look, this is a big night for Bernie Sanders. He is under a bright new spotlight, as you point out, because he's now tied in the polls with Secretary Clinton in New Hampshire and Iowa. So he is bracing himself for the sharpest attacks yet on health care and also on the issue of guns, which you and Eugene have also been discussing. One of his aides telling me, look, Secretary Clinton has a lot more experience than he has, but he keeps getting better with every debate. They need this to be his best debate yet. For Secretary Clinton, according to her campaign officials, her strategy tonight will be convincing voters that not only does she have the most experience, but that she would be the toughest candidate to stand up to a Republican in a general election. Now, Martin O'Malley, Chuck, just walked behind me. A little bit of news here. And he walked out onto the main stage to sort of get a sense of what the main stage looks and feels like. The stakes perhaps highest for him tonight, Chuck. Of course, he has failed to break through. He's got to do it tonight if he wants to be a part of this race. Chuck.
Well, it's going to be fascinating, Kristen Welker. As you get more info, check in. And we will get it done. As the candidates get ready to take the stage here in less than an hour, we're going to be talking to representatives from each campaign. And right now, I've got the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' campaign, Jeff Weaver. Mr. Weaver.
Nice to see you, Chuck.
Welcome. I assume. I know we've got some we had some audio issues. I assume we have them all fixed and everybody's hearing you just fine.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, we'll find out. So, Jeff, you guys put out your health care plan tonight.
Yes.
I'm guessing it was ready a week ago, or it could have been ready. You picked tonight for gamesmanship reasons, no?
Well, look, so we have been working on it for quite some time. But as you know, this is a very complicated issue. We wanted to make sure that we got it right. We wanted to put together a tax plan that would fund it progressively, and that's what we did. And so, I thought tonight was appropriate. That obviously a chance for the candidates to discuss issues like health care, which has been in the news.
Well, let's walk through the details of it. Okay, so it's Medicare for all.
Yes.
How do you pay for it?
Well, so we pay for it in a number of ways. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a 6.2% payroll tax on employers, which for employers who are providing health care now is a huge savings of thousands of dollars. We're going to put on a 2.2% premium on households, funded the same way we do or calculate like the income tax, which will, for a family of 4 making 50 grand, they will pay $446 a year. No co-payments, no deductibles, right? We're going to raise the income tax rates on upper income taxpayers. We're going to fix the estate tax and a few other changes.
As you know, a couple of times ago when Bernie Sanders was on the show, he seemed to say that he would only raise taxes on the middle class on for one issue, and that was to pay for paid leave. This is violating that pledge, no?
What you have to appreciate, and I know you do, because you follow these things, the average family is going to save over $5,000 in healthcare costs. So if you're a family of 4 making 50 grand and you have to pay $446 to Uncle Sam, but you're saving $5,000 and you have no co-payments, no deductibles, it seems like a pretty good deal.
Look, one of the arguments that the Clinton campaign is going to make is this is a fine idea, but the Democratic Party has spent nearly 8 years litigating healthcare, and doing this is another 8 years of litigating healthcare. Can the political system handle another healthcare debate like this?
Senator Sanders will be the first to tell you this isn't going to happen tomorrow. This is a vision that he is articulating. This is where he would like to go. I mean, universal healthcare has been a central tenet of the Democratic Party since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it would be really tragic to elect a candidate who does not support that anymore.
Does this mean that the senator thinks Obamacare just either didn't go far enough or wasn't good enough?
Well, look, he worked on the Affordable Care Act. He supported the Affordable Care Act. He was on the Senate committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act, and he strongly supported it. And it is a critically important step forward in the fight to get universal health care. There's no doubt about that. A major accomplishment, right? But we still have 29 million people without health insurance. We have many people with high co-payments and high deductibles. So, you know, the goal in the Democratic Party always is to move forward. We did Medicaid, Medicare, right? And then we did Medicaid. We've been trying to expand it. Then we did the Affordable Care Act. And
so you do argue this is an evolution, not a scrapping of Obamacare?
Absolutely.
Because this plan doesn't look like it builds on it.
This is the fulfillment of the Democratic vision since Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
But it doesn't build on Obamacare. It does scrap it.
No, I don't think that's true. It incorporates all of the programs into a new comprehensive program that covers everybody, just like every other major industrial country does.
You know, one of the things about watching Senator Sanders in this debate process, it seems like he hasn't been comfortable in these formats. What have you done to try to get him more comfortable?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think, you know, in the first debate, I thought we'd use that as an opportunity to talk to America, right? There wasn't as much engagement between the candidates. I think as we've gone along in the second and third debate, I think you've seen more interaction between the two candidates. And I'm sure, given this past week, you're going to see more engagement tonight than you have in past debates.
But it clearly is that you guys feel this sense of urgency. I mean, in a 24-hour period, Senator Sanders tried to answer 2 criticisms of the Clinton campaign. One on the gun immunity issue for gun manufacturers, and then suddenly putting on a health care plan.
And his tax plan, by the way. Right? So everybody wanted to know what the top tax marginal rate
was. And what is the top marginal rate going to be?
For people making $10 million or more, it's 52%.
Okay, and what about for those 250,000 up to in between?
500 is 37. 500 to 2 million is 43, and 2 million to 10 million is 48.
So it'll be 52 is the top, and you're talking a progressive rate that's going to have. Are we talking 6, 7? How many different categories are we looking at here?
Including the current tiers, I think you're looking at there's 4 there, and I think there's 3 underneath. So 4 underneath. So you'll get 8 tiers.
All right, now let me play political cynic here.
Sure, of course.
You get the Democratic nomination.
Right.
You and I both know how the Republican Party will be able to characterize this. Look at this. He wants to return to tax rates that we haven't seen in 50 years. This isn't John Kennedy's Democratic Party anymore. This is something different.
Look, what we have seen in the last 30 years is a massive transfer of wealth from working people and middle-income people to the top. It's about time that we switch that around and that middle-income and working people started to be the beneficiaries of what goes on in our society.
What do you think it's going to take for Bernie Sanders to go from sitting where he is now, 40 to 45% in Iowa, to whatever that last 5 to 10 points he needs? And who are those voters? Are they people that like him but don't think he can win? Are they people that like him but are wondering, can he pass the commander-in-chief test? Who are these last?
Well,
who do you think it is?
I think there's 3 groups of people, right? There are sort of consistent Democratic voters who obviously know Secretary Clinton much better. I mean, she's just a better-known commodity. There's independents who we're bringing in, and new voters who we're bringing in, new Democratic voters. So we're expanding the base. It's not just convincing people who are current Democrats, which we are obviously trying to do, but expanding the Democratic Democratic base, which is why he does so well in general election matchups against Republicans, because he expands the Democratic base.
Well, Jeff Weaver, you guys have been busy in the last 24 hours, a tax plan, a health care plan, and you waited to the last minute to make sure that Hillary Clinton had a cram for it, huh?
Well, I think we released 6 pages. I think the secretary can read 6 pages in 3 hours.
All right, Jeff Weaver, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks,
we'll be watching tonight.
We got it.
We're going to take a short break. As you can see, we've got a lot going on here in the pre-show here before the debate. And when we come back, I'm going to speak to the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi. We'll get her take on tonight's debate.
I'm getting ready to do something too. I'm running for president.
Today, I'm formally entering the race for the Democratic nomination for president.
And it may very well be that that process, by the time we get through it, closes the window on mounting a realistic campaign.
Hundreds of thousands of bright, capable young people are giving up the dream of a higher education because their families do not have enough money.
Up and out the well, cross the mountain, square man, up bleed the mountain man.
Hi, good to meet you. How old are you? Are you 3 years old?
Oh. They were all doing yoga when they
I don't
were
want
in town.
Oh my gosh, I love yoga.
And we are back here at the Gilliard Center in Charleston, South Carolina. Less than 45 minutes from the start of tonight's Democratic debate. And by the way, we have a little pre-show going on there, so you'll be hearing that in the background. But I want to show some quick pictures here. Hillary Clinton arriving a few moments ago. Fairly, you'll see her there in the pictures, a little bit of an entourage, but there she is getting ready for a debate. And they have, of course, in the last 10 days have indicated they plan on engaging Bernie Sanders in a way that they haven't done before. But as we continue our coverage here, I want to bring in the leader of the House Democrats, none other than Nancy Pelosi. Congresswoman Pelosi, nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
All right, Madam Leader, let me ask you this. you're, I assume, officially, are you totally non-endorsed yet, correct?
I have not endorsed yet.
And so, is that as a party leader role, or what are you waiting for?
I'm very excited about all of the candidates. I think all of them expand the pie of people who will be voting in the general election. Every one of their supporters is important to us in electing a Democratic president.
Have you been concerned that there had been more coverage and more eyeballs on the Republican debates than there had been on the Democratic debates?
Well, I have been one who had advocated for more debates. I think that they have done justice to our issues and to our candidates.
Well, and I get if you watched any of the Sunday morning shows, I think the two candidates want to debate, so let them debate more, right?
Well, there are more debates to come.
Look, we're going to have a lot of conversations tonight, I think, particularly about healthcare and guns.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, just in general on healthcare, Senator Sanders released a plan. They say it expands upon Obamacare. The Hillary Clinton folks are saying no, it erases it and all this stuff. But let me just ask you this larger question. Can Washington handle another healthcare debate?
Well, the fact is that this has been an ongoing debate for many years, and healthcare, access to healthcare is an evolving subject. We're always trying to improve it. We're very proud of the Affordable Care Act. 18 million people previously uninsured, insured now, no pre-existing conditions, no lifetime limits. All of that, the list goes on and on. So we're very proud of it. But
there
it
were
doesn't
reasons,
mean there couldn't be improvements.
Right, but there were reasons you didn't do Medicare for all, right? There were reasons you didn't have a public option. What were those reasons?
Well, I was for a public option.
No, I know you were personally for it, but you couldn't get it done, right?
Well,
you couldn't get it passed.
We passed it in the House. We didn't get it done. But again, that doesn't mean the conversation is over. But the fact is, I think it's important for the Affordable Care Act to get a chance to do its job and then see what improvements we can make in terms of access, affordability, quality of care. But we're on a good path. We've reduced the cost. You know, as has been said in the debates, the increase in healthcare has been the biggest contributor to our deficit, and now that has changed. We've taken that in a different direction. So cost was one of the big reasons why we had to do care. Cost to individuals, cost to the federal government, cost to our economy, and now that has been reversed.
What is this, you know, election? Sometimes there's change elections, sometimes there's continuity elections. What is this election to you? Is this going to be a big change election? Is this going to be a continuity election? Is it going to be somewhere in between? What do you think this election is going to be about? I mean, in the big picture.
Well, we are amused by each other always saying this is the most important election of our time.
By the way, I've covered that every 4 years.
Right.
Actually, you covered every 2 years, right? Yeah.
Right. But the fact is, they just keep getting more urgent. To me, the election is not about the differences among the Democrats, because they're minor compared to the big differences with the Republicans, between Democrats and Republicans. To me, the election is about the future, and that future depends on us going forward with an economy, a middle-class economy, middle-class economics versus trickle-down economics. Republicans right now want to take us back to where they took us in 2008, when we came to a near depression in our country. I think it's really important for the public to understand they didn't learn a lesson then. They want to go back to that. Tax cuts for the wealthiest and special interest. We don't begrudge successful people, their success, their wealth, their accomplishment, but we don't want it to be done at the exploitation and ignoring the needs of working families for growing their paychecks.
I'm curious, watching the stock market over the last 2 weeks, are you having any like deja vu flashbacks to 8 years ago? Remember, it was about the start of 08 when suddenly it looked like things were going south. Are you at all concerned about this?
Well,
what do people tell you about all this, what this means?
What we have that is different from 08 is we have Dodd-Frank. We have some checks on Wall Street. And again, I don't paint everyone on Wall Street with the same brush, but the fact that they were on that path, and they want to take us back to that. They want to dismantle Dodd-Frank, the real check, and that will protect us from what happened in 2008.
You're a student of American politics. You've been in so many different battles in different election years.
Yes.
What do you make of the country's anxiety What do you think is the underlying reason for the anxiety? It's clear there's anxiety out there. What do you think it is?
I think that it's really important to evaluate what happened in 2008 very carefully. It was a situation where families were threatened in terms of their financial stability, their home ownership, their pensions, their jobs, the ability to send their children to school. They saw us bail out Wall Street in their view, which was to bail out our entire economy, and nobody bailed them out. And I think that uncertainty is what is holding in check any consumer confidence that they might have. And consumer confidence is the lifeblood of our economy.
Right.
And if they don't feel comfortable to take consume, that we're never really going to grow the economy to the full benefit of everyone enjoying prosperity. And since the president took office, remember this, unemployment was 10% when he took office. It's now 5%.
But we do have a wage issue. That clearly is driving.
We have a wage issue,
yeah.
and part of that would have, we would have done better if the Republicans would have went along with or suggested anything to address that. But you cannot address it if you're saying no to any suggestion that is made by the President of the United States. If you just say wages will increase if we give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our country and to special interests. So we have to invest in education, invest in research and development, invest in infrastructure in our country so we create good paying jobs. And when we increase the paycheck, we will, everybody in our economy will benefit.
I know you're officially neutral. You broke a glass ceiling as Speaker of the House.
Marble ceiling.
Marble ceiling, that's right. You broke a marble ceiling as the first woman Speaker of the House. How important is it for the Democratic Party to elect the first woman president?
It would be very exciting. There's no question. I mean, I love all of our candidates. I'm from Maryland. I appreciate Martin O'Malley and support his agenda. I'm a colleague of Bernie Sanders and love the fact that he's attracting so many people to his point of view. Hillary Clinton is the first woman president. It would send quite a I can say from my own experience, being Speaker is different from being president, but nonetheless, the public awareness of it is different, but nonetheless, the response that we got from around the country and around the world was
Something about being the first.
Well, being the first woman.
Right.
Being first woman, because we believe when women succeed, America succeeds.
Right. Nancy Pelosi, I know you want to get down to your seat and watch this debate. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. We're going to take another quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to go to Iowa, because we're going to be joined by a representative of, and also joined by Representative Martin O'Malley's campaign, but from Iowa, a whole bunch of voters who are going to watch the debate with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Charleston, South Carolina. As you can see there is Bernie Sanders, the final candidate to arrive here tonight. It's going to be quite the contentious debate, I have a feeling. When I had Bernie Sanders on the show this morning, he answered every question with trying to talk about Hillary Clinton. All right, now let's go backstage to Kristen Welker. She right now has a representative of Martin O'Malley's campaign, South Carolina State Senator Vincent Shaheen.
Right, it was your
Kristen.
bill, yeah.
We don't hear anything.
It looks like we've got a little bit of a audio issue there. Kristen Welker, are you hearing me backstage? All right. We will wait to fix that. It's a live event. We got a lot going on here. I got Eugene Robinson back with me here. So, Eugene, I asked Nancy Pelosi whether Washington could handle another health care debate.
Right.
She dodged because she wants to stay officially neutral there. But is this an evolution on health care for Democrats, or is this a change?
Well, look, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Nancy Pelosi have long philosophically believed in truly universal health care.
Harry Truman, Ted Kennedy, we can go on and on, right?
Richard Nixon, actually, too.
Don't forget Richard Nixon.
If you want to be technical. You know, the question is, politics being the art of the possible, is it possible to go back into health care, given the fact that the Affordable Care Act barely passed? I mean, that was the fight of all fights, and it set the tone for the rest of President Obama's presidency. It's difficult to imagine that Congress is going to pass such a sweeping reform of health care. Then again, as I said before, this is a weird year, and people are sending a message. And potentially will send a very strong message.
I think everybody's tired. I think that the base of both parties is tired of incrementalism.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, what is the right upset about? They're upset that their party doesn't fight hard enough. That doesn't go all the way.
It's the candidates who think big and talk big.
And I think progressives are thinking the same.
They're the ones who are getting the attention. They're the ones who are inspiring passion among voters, and that can make a difference this year.
All right. Well, we've been doing live television. The good news is I can now go to Kristen Welker, my pal over there backstage. She's got a representative of Martin O'Malley's campaign with her, none other than South Carolina State Senator Vincent Shaheen. Let's see if we can do this time. Kristen, take it away.
I hear you loud and clear now. Thanks, Chuck. That's right. As we've been talking about, the stakes are incredibly high for Martin O'Malley tonight. He is polling in the single digits. Senator Shaheen, thank you so much for joining me. Is it too late for Martin O'Malley to break through?
I don't think so. I remember well 2008 when Hillary Clinton seemed to be about to win South Carolina, and then just a few weeks out, that changed dramatically. People are looking for new leadership. They're looking for someone to lead us into the future, and I think he has a great shot.
But he is polling in the single digits, and the Iowa caucuses are 15 days away. What does he have to do in this debate that he hasn't been able to do yet?
Well, I think it's critical in this debate that he portray that image of who he is. He is the next generation of leadership for Democrats in this country. You know, we've seen the Clintons, we've seen the Bernie Sanders around forever. The question is tonight, can he connect with the public to let them realize that Martin O'Malley really has what it takes to lead us into the future?
You've been giving him some advice. What is your top piece of advice for him?
Be different from the other two. You know, he doesn't need to engage in the petty bickering that we've seen go on for 40 years in Washington, D.C. Martin O'Malley's done things. He's actually accomplished things tonight. He needs to let the public know it.
Senator Sanders just released his plan to pay for his single-payer Medicare for All health care plan. I know you've had a chance to look at the broad details. What's your reaction if you were counseling Martin O'Malley? What should his line of attack be, if anything?
He shouldn't attack. I think the basic goals between all three Democratic candidates are the same with health care: expand coverage and bring costs down. They might have different ways of
Bernie Sanders' plan is dramatically different than Martin O'Malley's or Hillary Clinton.
Martin O'Malley's plan really is focused on the cost savings that would allow people to expand their opportunities for health care. Again, he's thinking differently, outside the box, different than what we've heard from Bernie Sanders for 40-plus years and Hillary Clinton for quite a while.
And let's just try quickly on the issue of guns. As you know, just yesterday, Senator Sanders reversed himself on a piece of gun legislation to align himself a little bit more with President Obama. What can we expect to hear from Martin O'Malley on that?
I think Martin O'Malley supports common sense reforms.
But does he see that as a flip-flop?
I don't think he'll be attacking Bernie Sanders tonight. I really don't. He'll show the public that he's been consistent when perhaps the others haven't. But his job is to focus on his message, and I think you'll see that tonight.
But should he sharpen his attacks if he wants to break through? Does he need to?
Actually, I think that'd be the opposite approach, the wrong approach. We've seen Clinton and Bernie Sanders go at it, and you know what? I think people are tired of it, and they're looking for something different. Lord knows we need something different.
Senator Shaheen, thank you so much. Chuck, I'll toss it back to you.
Very interesting, Kristen. I think we do know the Martin O'Malley strategy. I think they're hoping the other two have a fiery night. Anyway, we are partnering for this debate with YouTube. And you'll also be able to watch the debate online on YouTube and at NBCnews.com. Plus, you'll be able to interact as you watch, and we'll be tracking your questions and comments. We'll be joined in that effort by Daniel Seberg of the Google News Lab, who has been looking at the issues and questions that are currently trending going into tonight's debate. So, Daniel, tell us what we got.
Sure, Chuck. We've been looking at the data over the weeks and days leading up to the debate. In fact, even minute by minute, that will be available at google.com/trends. And if we look at a national map of search interest, we can see that Bernie Sanders is really getting the bulk of interest across the country, followed by Hillary Clinton. We will follow that over the course of the debate and see how that changes, almost a bit of a horse race graphic. And we'll see, of course, which issues are topical and what's really on the front of mind for people who want to get context and clarity as they turn to search.
All right, Daniel, we'll be watching that. Let me ask you this. When you see this and you see the engagement, it feels as if Bernie Sanders has had more engagement online. So is it just in the last week, or that's been the last 6 months?
So that was over the past week, but you could argue that he's had more search interest sort of in general. Perhaps part of that is that perhaps people aren't as familiar with his policies. You know, for example, in the past 4 hours, we saw about a 600% increase in searches around his health care policy, which we know is now available to folks. And maybe people know a bit more about Hillary Clinton. But there are questions that people have, and we actually have a graphic to show you, what people are asking when they turn to search. So, for example, with Bernie Sanders, they ask things like, why is Bernie Sanders so popular? Can Bernie Sanders win? And of course, how old is Bernie Sanders? And we see that a lot with different candidates. With Hillary Clinton, we see things like, will Hillary Clinton get prosecuted? Questions around the Benghazi hearings. And then with Martin O'Malley, we see things like, why is Martin O'Malley running for president? Is he still running for president? So of course, not as known to folks, and people have those questions about whether he's even still in the race at this point.
And what you're telling me, there's sometimes a little bit of snark online. We're shocked at some of those tougher
curiosity
ways. Anyway, curiosity, fair enough.
Maybe a bit
anyway, Daniel Seberg, you got it. Daniel, thanks very much. Well, as we've noted, Iowa, of course, will kick off the primary season with its caucuses. It's just 15 days from now. And we're going to be watching the debate with some voters in Iowa. They are at a debate watch party in Urbandale. That is basically a suburb of Des Moines. The race in Iowa now is very tight between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. We've had 3 polls in the last week. 2 have had Hillary Clinton up by 3 or less, and 1 has had Sanders up by 2. A lot going on here tonight. 23 minutes away from the debate. We'll be right back.
In 1999, you voted for the very bill that made banks bigger.
The Glass-Steagall was my very first vote. I just arrived. My dad had died in office. I was appointed to the office. It was my very first vote.
Are you saying you didn't know what you were voting for?
I just arrived at the Senate.
I'd have to say the enemy soldier that threw the grenade that wounded me, but he's not around right now to talk to.
All right, time for closing statements.
The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
And other questions still lingered. And these questions lingered because previous investigations were not thorough.
It would have happened long ago. The fact of the matter is, and let's say it in our debate because you'll never hear this from that immigrant-bashing carnival barker, Donald Trump, the truth of the matter is,
Less than 20 minutes for the start of the debate. We're back here in Charleston, waiting for the candidates to come on stage. We've heard from O'Malley's campaign, the Sanders campaign. So we're missing one, aren't we? We're joined now by Joel Benenson. He is, of course, the senior strategist for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Joel, nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Chuck, as always.
Okay, the campaign over the last, I'd say, 72 hours wanted to see Bernie Sanders rethink his position on immunity for gun manufacturers. They wanted to see him release his health care plan, and they wanted to see him release his tax plan. Well, check, check, check. You guys succeeded.
Well, I think
he's released all of these things.
Well, in a manner of speaking, I mean, what we've seen happen in the last 24 to 48 hours is he's come under a lot of scrutiny. The election days are getting closer, and as his plans and what he's been saying about them come under scrutiny, he's kind of had to backtrack, and there's a bit of unsteadiness here. So after weeks of saying he would never change his mind on this provision on immunity, giving gun dealers immunity, he did exactly that. He came under scrutiny from Secretary Clinton, and he criticized her for the question she was raising about his health care plan, and he's now, after having the same plan, Chuck, for 20 years, he's introduced it 9 times in Congress. 2 hours before a debate, he suddenly released the shell of a plan. And I think what's clear here is that no one knows for sure what the details are in his plans at all.
You don't believe he provided enough details telling how he would pay for it? There was, I mean, he's got some pay for the payroll tax and how it would work.
I think they put out a press release. I don't think they put out a plan. I think as we learned about the last plan where he said all of her criticisms were wrong, he's now basically acknowledged the criticisms are right, and he's trying to make adjustments for it. So there is something here. The details do matter when you're running for president. When you want to get real results that will make a real difference in people's lives, you have to get the details right. That's part of the job. So I think what's happened here is just some, I don't want to call it sleight of hand, but there's certainly some changes going on here from a guy who said he's been consistent his whole life.
Let's talk about the mood of the Democratic electorate. Yeah. Because it was interesting. In our NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, we asked what kind of candidate are you looking for? Somebody that's been tested with experience, or somebody that will bring a lot of change. Now, a majority of Democrats want somebody who's tested and experienced. A majority of Americans want somebody who's going to bring change. Among Democrats, Bernie Sanders, I got one of my charts here, you've been looking at it, Bernie Sanders does do better than Hillary Clinton among those Democrats who want change. Hillary Clinton does a lot better among those Democrats who want somebody experienced and tested. There is a change vibe that's out there, and you start seeing it in the Democratic Party. Do you think it's only going to grow, and do you think Hillary Clinton has to respond to that vibe?
No, I actually think there's look, when you get your national results and you say a majority of people want change, you've got a lot of Republicans in that sample.
But 61% isn't all Republican, you know that.
No,
61 isn't all Republican.
No, it's independents too. Yeah, I think people want to build on the progress we've made. I think they know we've got unfinished work here. I think President Obama acknowledged that in his State of the Union, and certainly Secretary Clinton has been saying we've got to build on the progress, that we've got to keep doing more to get people's incomes rising and create the good-paying jobs that will do that. We need to restore more fairness to our economy, and we need both growth and fairness in order to be able to get people their incomes up, get them their costs down on things like prescription drugs. That's how the American people and their families will get ahead. So I think people want a candidate who does have the experience to bring changes and build on progress, someone who has what it takes to do the job. I think that's why she's doing reasonably pretty well right now.
What do you tell those voters, and maybe it's this last chunk of undecided voters in Iowa, some of whom, you know, they'll look at the Sanders tax plan, they'll look at Clinton's tax plan, and they'll say, well, he's going for broke. And you guys will argue, well, she's going for what can get done. How do you tell a voter sometimes doesn't want to hear, well, this is as most as we can get done versus what we wish we could do?
No, I don't think she's going for what can get done. I think what she's going for are for things that will make a real difference in people's lives. You do have to get things done when you're president. You have to have a president who has what it takes to do all parts of the job, whether we're talking about keeping them safe against the terrorist threats we face and the global threats, or whether it's getting our economy moving again and getting it up to full throttle so kids can go to college debt-free, so that people can get better jobs and get their incomes rising, so that women are making the same amount as men when they do the same work. That takes a president who has what it takes to do all parts of the job and get real results for people.
Would you describe Hillary Clinton as a change candidate or not?
I think Hillary Clinton is a change agent. I think Hillary Clinton has been pushing the limits all her entire career. She took on the healthcare industry 20 years ago, long before others were.
All right, Joel Benenson, I got to leave it there. You've got some debate prep to do. We're just about 15 minutes until the start of tonight's debate, and when we come back, we're going to go back to the stage with our correspondents, and you're going to see a first glimpse of the candidates sharing the stage together.
The first line of defense against radicalization is in the Muslim American community. I worry greatly that the rhetoric coming from the Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, is sending a message to Muslims here in the United States and literally around the world that there is a clash of civilizations, that there is some kind of Western plot or even war against Islam, which then, I believe, fans the flames of radicalization.
Senator Sanders, you fired a campaign staffer. You have sued the Democratic National Committee. All of this after your campaign acknowledged that some of your staffers, quote, irresponsibly accessed data from another campaign. The Clinton campaign called this a very egregious breach of data and ethics and said, quote, our data was stolen.
The DNC vendor screwed up. Information came to our campaign. In this case, our staff did the wrong thing. They looked at that information. As soon as we learned that they looked at that information, we fired that person. We are now doing an independent internal investigation.
Good evening. It is a big night in American politics. We are less than 10 minutes from tonight's Democratic debate between the three top candidates. I'm Chuck Todd here at the Gilliard Center in Charleston, South Carolina, where the three candidates, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley, are backstage about to take their places at the podiums. Clinton and Sanders have been setting some of the broad themes of this debate. Earlier today, they went all over the Sunday morning shows, including Meet the Press. The themes of change versus experience and change versus continuity. This will be their final showdown face-to-face before the Iowa caucuses, which are 2 weeks from tomorrow, when the first votes of the 2016 presidential race will finally be cast. Tonight's debate, by the way, will be moderated by our own Lester Holt, and he'll be joined in the questioning by Andrea Mitchell. Throughout the debate, all of us, including our correspondents and experts, will be providing real-time analysis. So, gone over for a second screen experience at NBCnews.com. But right now, let's get into a little bit of the pre-debate action. We're going to go down to Andrea Mitchell and Kristen Welker, who are backstage. Kristen, take it away.
Hey, Chuck. Well, I'm with the great Andrea Mitchell just moments before this debate. You're excited, I'm sure.
We are so excited. I mean, this is the opportunity, and just before Iowa, the last debate before Iowa, to see the candidates, see Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley, hear what they have to say about big issues and what their contrasts are, what are their differences, and help the voters decide.
And I don't want to give anything away about the debate, but set the scene of the backdrop to this debate. You've been on the campaign trail, I've been on the campaign trail, a lot of sharp attacks.
A lot of elbows. I mean, the timing could not be better, Kristen, as you know. They have been going at each other, the intensity of the campaign. She has, been acknowledging to supporters that perhaps they underestimated him. He's got so much support, but here we are in South Carolina, where she has the enthusiasm and the passion and much deeper roots with the African-American voters. So this, ironically, could be her firewall if he, as current polls would suggest, and if it turns out that way, he could win Iowa. He's got a shot at that. He certainly has a strong neighborhood connection to New Hampshire, being from Vermont. So this could be the place in South Carolina that tests whether he has legs to go further.
So much at stake for each of these candidates. Andrea, just break it down for us by candidate. What are you going to be looking for?
Well, we want to hear Hillary Clinton and see how does she go after him? How tough is she going to be? Obviously, there are big foreign policy questions, at stake as well, as we see this weekend. And for Bernie Sanders, this is the test of, is this going to be the polite Democratic campaign, or is it going to be what we've seen on the campaign trail?
And let's just pause. We have Secretary Clinton entering right now, shaking some hands. And Governor O'Malley following her, shaking Debbie Wasserman Schultz's hand, of course, the chairwoman of the DNC. The stakes could not be higher as they walk out onto the stage. And here is Senator Sanders. So we have all three candidates now walking out onto the stage preparing for this pivotal debate just 15 days before the Iowa caucuses, the last time these candidates face off, before the voters have their say. So talk about the anticipation that you feel just being here, Andrea, that we all feel.
Well, it's so exciting. We see them on the trail. We shout questions or try to ask them questions. We see them at rallies. You can hear the cheers from inside the theater. But this is the chance to get into the policies with them and really talk about the things they care about and how they handle the pressure from each other.
Well, there's no one better to do that than you and Lester, and we are very excited about that. And Chuck, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Kristen. The candidates are on stage right behind me. You hear the cheers there. By the way, we went from all those red ties at the Republican debate last week, and it's nothing but blue on stage with our three candidates. Let me go to another veteran political observer who's watching tonight. It's none other than my pal Dan Balls. He's, of course, the chief correspondent of the Washington Post. And Dan, boy, I tell you, in the last 72 hours, suddenly the Democratic campaign became the Republican campaign. There's fighting. There's all sorts of exchanges. There's a debate that people are actually anticipating with bated breath. What a 72 hours for Hillary Clinton.
It's been a real roller coaster for her. And Chuck, what we're looking at tonight is the opening of the closing arguments in this campaign for these two candidates. Martin O'Malley's on the stage, but all the focus is on Sanders and Clinton. We know that she's going to be tough on him. He's changed his position on guns in the last couple of days. He's got a new plan on health care that he put out just before the debate. There is a lot of substance on the table tonight that they're going to go after one another on.
Ultimately, Dan, this feels like this is two candidates that have to try to convince the Democratic electorate that either you want radical change or basically continuity with a little bit of change. And it seems as if that's been the struggle for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders has had a bit of an easier time making that change, radical change argument.
Very true. I think the other issue is electability. She's going to push that question on him throughout not only the debate, but the final weeks before the Iowa caucuses in New Hampshire, raise questions in voters' minds about whether Bernie Sanders can actually win a general election. He is going to try to show that he's got a grassroots movement. We know he's got some significant following, but what he's going to try to do is say he can bring out voters in November that she can't do.
How much, you know, it's interesting, this electability argument. You've spent a lot of time in Iowa and New Hampshire. I have too. Electability is a word you don't often hear in Iowa and New Hampshire. You'll hear it in future primaries, but not in those first two contests.
Well, that's right, and I question how much it will have an effect in Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, those states are somewhat immune to the kinds of arguments that we hear from candidates at later points in the campaign. I think that in Iowa and New Hampshire, they've gotten a very close look. And really, you know, it's a cliche, but there is so much effort now going into the ground game, into identifying the last hard supporters for each candidate and making sure they get out. And so the question of electability in Iowa will probably be less important than it is later.
All right, Dan Balls, I'll let you get to your seat so you can start writing and reporting. Thanks very much. Let me go back to Kristen Welker. She spent much of the day talking with the campaigns ahead of tonight's debate. She's backstage. We see everybody getting wired up. What are you hearing back there? Any? Do you see nervousness? Do you see jitters, smiles? What are you seeing?
Chuck, you can feel the anticipation back here. There certainly aren't a whole lot of smiles. This is game time. The candidates are talking to their top aides. They're getting mic'd up. They're going over their last-minute thoughts and ideas before they step out onto that stage, as we've been reporting all night. This is the most pivotal debate yet. It's coming just days before the all-important Iowa caucuses, before the voters weigh in, and it comes about 24 hours after Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders changed his position on a key piece of gun legislation, and just 2 hours after he released the pay-for plan of his health care plan. So expect Secretary Clinton to draw sharp lines with him over both of those issues, but also to paint him as a flip-flopper. We've seen that in her language, and based on your conversation, of course, with Mr. Benenson, he signaled that that will be her line of attack as well. And for Martin O'Malley, the stakes could not be higher. He is polling in the single digits. This is his chance to really have a breakthrough moment. Based on my conversation with Senator Shaheen earlier in the hour, it doesn't seem like he's going to be in attack mode, but Chuck, he might need to draw some of these sharp lines if he really wants to break through and get on the map of this very competitive race. Chuck?
Kristen, I am curious here. I feel like this entire pre-debate few hours has all been about Bernie Sanders. It's about him releasing this plan. It's about him changing his position on guns. It's about him releasing a tax plan. This is a debate that's going to be about Bernie Sanders for better or for worse unless something changes, no?
What an incredible tactic, Chuck. He has essentially tried to knock the Clinton campaign off of its game. Is he successful? We'll have to see when they take the stage. Chuck?
All right. Kristen Welker backstage. It's going to be a doozy. Thanks very much. So, what are we going to see tonight? This is a Democratic electorate that is not quite as antsy as the Republican electorate is. Democrats are trying to do something that hasn't happened very often. That is elect a president for a third straight term. Hillary Clinton being seen more as the continuity candidate with Barack Obama, sort of progressive change, pragmatic change. I think she described that herself. Bernie Sanders trying to tap into the progressive idealistic movement. We've seen it. He's got energy in New Hampshire. That's a neighboring state of his, but he's also got energy in Iowa now. This is the final showdown between these candidates before Iowa and New Hampshire take place. So after this, they are going to be racing to Iowa, and I guarantee you it is going to be nothing but wall-to-wall campaigning. We're at the time where every day is a week, and every week will feel like a day. All right, so coming up, it is the NBC News YouTube Democratic debate, moderated by our own Lester Holt and Andrea Mitchell. Here they are.
I am ready to play and win for you.
Let's have the courage to take on the billionaire class.
We must build an American economy that works for all of us.
I believe we should break up the large banks. Hillary Clinton does not.
Senator Sanders has been a pretty reliable vote for the gun lobby.
To say that I'm kind of a supporter of the NRA is a mean-spirited and inaccurate statement.
Senator Sanders voted to give immunity to gun dealers. Secretary Clinton changes her position on this every election year.
My view is we shouldn't be ripping up Obamacare and starting over.
Now she's attacking me because I support universal health care.
I think America is great, and it's up to us to make sure we make it greater.
I believe we're going to make history one more time.
The Democratic Candidates Debate, live from the Gilliard Center in Charleston, South Carolina. Here now, Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome to the NBC News YouTube Democratic Candidates Debate. After all the campaigning, soon Americans will have their say with the first votes of the 2016 campaign just 15 days away in Iowa and New Hampshire, not far behind. Tonight will be the final opportunity to see these candidates face to face before the voting begins. Our purpose here tonight is to highlight and examine the differences among the three Democratic candidates. So let's get started. Please welcome Secretary Hillary Clinton, Senator Bernie Sanders, and Governor Martin O'Malley. Welcome to all of you. Hope you're excited. We're excited. We want to thank our host, the Congressional Black Caucus Institute. I'm joined by my colleague, Andrea Mitchell, tonight. The rules are simple. 60 seconds for answers, 30 seconds for follow-ups or rebuttals. I know you'll all keep exactly to time, so our job should be pretty easy here tonight. We'll also have questions from the YouTube community throughout the debate. This is a critical point in the race. You've been defining your differences with each other, especially vigorously in the last week on the campaign trail. We're here to facilitate this conversation on behalf of the voters so that they know exactly where you stand as you face off tonight. Let's have a great debate. We'll begin with 45-second opening statements from each candidate, starting with Secretary Clinton.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Institute and the people of Charleston for hosting us here on the eve of Martin Luther King Day tomorrow. You know, I remember well when my youth minister took me to hear Dr. King. I was a teenager, and his moral clarity, the message that he conveyed that evening, really stayed with me and helped to set me on a path to service. I also remember that he spent the last day of his life in Memphis fighting for dignity and higher pay for working people, and that is our fight still. We have to get the economy working and incomes rising for everyone, including those who have been left out and left behind. We have to keep our communities and our country safe. We need a president who can do all aspects of the job. I understand that this is the hardest job in the world. I'm prepared and ready to take it on, and I hope to earn your support to be the nominee of the Democratic Party and the next president of the United States.
Thank you. Senator Sanders, your opening statement, sir.
Thank you. As we honor the extraordinary life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., it's important not only that we remember what he stood for, but that we pledge to continue his vision to transform our country. And as we look out at our country today, what the American people understand is we have an economy that's rigged, that ordinary Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, 47 million people living in poverty, and almost all of the new income and wealth going to the top 1%. And then, to make a bad situation worse, we have a corrupt campaign finance system where millionaires and billionaires are spending extraordinary amounts of money to buy elections. This campaign is about a political revolution to not only elect the president, but to transform this country.
Senator, thank you. And Governor O'Malley, your opening statement, sir.
Thank you. My name is Martin O'Malley. I was born the year Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, and I want to thank the people of South Carolina, not only for hosting our debate here tonight, but also for what you taught all of us in the aftermath of the tragic shooting at Mother Emanuel Church. You taught us, in fact, in keeping with Dr. King's teaching, that love would have the final word when you took down the Confederate flag from your state house. Let go of the past and move forward. 8 years ago, you brought forward a new leader in Barack Obama to save our country from the Second Great Depression, and that's what he's done. Our country's doing better. We're creating jobs again. But in order to make good on the promise of equal opportunity and equal justice under the law, we have urgent work to do, and the voices of anger and fear and division that we've heard coming off of the Republican presidential podiums are pretty loud. We need new leadership. We need to come together as a people and build on the good things that President Obama has done. That's why I'm running for president. I need your help. I ask for your vote, and I look forward to moving our country forward once again. Thank you.
Governor, thank you. All right, to our first question now. The first question I'll be addressing to all of the candidates. President Obama came to office determined to swing for the fences on health care reform. Voters want to know how you would define your presidency. How would you think big? So complete this sentence. In my first 100 days in office, my top 3 priorities will be, fill in the blank. Senator Sanders.
Well, that's what our campaign is about. It is thinking big. It is understanding that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we should have health care for every man, woman, and child as a right, that we should raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, that we have got to create millions of decent paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. So what my first days are about is bringing America together to end the decline of the middle class, to tell the wealthiest people in this country that yes, they are going to start paying their fair share of taxes, and that we are going to have a government that works for all of us and not just big campaign contributors.
Secretary Clinton, same question. My first 100 days in office, my top 3 priorities will be.
I would work quickly to present to the Congress my plans for creating more good jobs in manufacturing, infrastructure, clean and renewable energy, raising the minimum wage, and guaranteeing finally equal pay for women's work. I would also be presenting my plans to build on the Affordable Care Act and to improve it by decreasing the out-of-pocket costs, by putting a cap on prescription drug costs, by looking for ways that we can put the prescription drug business and the health insurance company business on a more stable platform that doesn't take too much money out of the pockets of hardworking Americans. And third, I would be working in every way that I knew to bring our country together. We do have too much division, too much mean-spiritedness. There's a lot we have to do on immigration reform, on voting rights, on campaign finance reform, but we need to do it together. That's how we'll have the kind of country for the 21st century that we know will guarantee our children and grandchildren the kind of future they deserve.
Governor O'Malley, same question.
Thank you. First of all, I would lay out an agenda to make wages go up again for all Americans rather than down. Equal pay for equal work. Making it easier rather than harder for people to join labor unions and bargain collectively for better wages. Getting 11 million of our neighbors out of the underground shadow economy by passing comprehensive immigration reform. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour however we can, wherever we can. Secondly, I believe the greatest business opportunity to come to the United States of America in 100 years is climate change. And I put forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric energy grid by 2050 and create 5 million jobs along the way.
Thank you. You've all
Finally, I'm sorry, that was second, Lester. And third and finally, we need a new agenda for America's cities. We have not had a new agenda for America's cities since Jimmy Carter. We need a new agenda for America's cities that will invest in the talents and the skills of our people, that will invest in CDBG, transportation, infrastructure, and transit options, and make our cities the leading edge in this move to a redesigned, built, clean, green energy future that will employ our people.
All right, Governor, thank you. You've all laid out large visions, and we're going to cover a lot of the ground you talked about as we continue in the evening. The last couple of weeks of this campaign have featured some of the sharpest exchanges in the race. Let's start with one of them, the issue of guns. Senator Sanders, last week Secretary Clinton called you, quote, a pretty reliable vote for the gun lobby. Right before the debate, you changed your position on immunity from lawsuits for gun manufacturers. Can you tell us why?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton knows that what she says is very disingenuous. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. I was in 1988. There were 3 candidates running for Congress in the state of Vermont. I stood up to the gun lobby and came out and maintained the position that in this country, we should not be selling military-style assault weapons. I have supported from day one an instant background check to make certain that people who should not have guns do not have guns. And that includes people with criminal backgrounds, people who are mentally unstable. I support what President Obama is doing in terms of trying to close the gun show loopholes, and I think it should be a federal crime if people act as strawmen. We have seen in this city a horrendous tragedy of a crazed person praying with people and then coming out and shooting 9 people. This should not be a political issue. What we should be doing is working together. And by the way, as a senator from a rural state that has virtually no gun control, I believe that I am in an excellent position to bring people together
Senator,
to fight for sensible gun safety legislation. But you didn't answer the question that you did change your position on immunity for gun manufacturers. So can you answer the question? What I have said is that the gun manufacturers liability bill had some good provisions. Among other things, we prohibited ammunition that would have killed cops who had protection on. We had child safety protection for guns in that legislation. And what we also said is a small mom and pop gun shop who sells a gun legally to somebody should not be held liable if somebody does something terrible with that gun. So what I said is I would relook at it. We are going to relook at it, and I will support stronger provisions.
Secretary Clinton, would you like to respond to Senator Sanders?
Yes. Look, I have made it clear, based on Senator Sanders' own record, that he has voted with the NRA, with the gun lobby, numerous times. He voted against the Brady bill 5 times. He voted for what we call the Charleston loophole. He voted for immunity from gun makers and sellers, which the NRA said was the most important piece of gun legislation in 20 years. He voted to let guns go onto Amtrak, guns go into national parks. He voted against doing research to figure out how we can save lives. Let's not forget what this is about. 90 people a day die from gun violence in our country. That's 33,000 people a year. One of the most horrific examples, not a block from here, where we had 9 people murdered. Now, I am pleased to hear that Senator Sanders has reversed his position on immunity, and I look forward to him joining with those members of Congress who have already introduced legislation. There is no other industry in America that was given the total pass that the gun makers and dealers were, and that needs to be reversed.
All right, Governor O'Malley, you signed tough gun control measures as governor of Maryland, and there are a lot of Democrats in the audience here in South Carolina who own guns. This conversation might be worrying many of them. They may be hearing, you want to take my guns. What would you say to them?
Yeah, this is what I would say, Lester. Look, I've listened to Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders go back and forth on which of them has the most inconsistent record on gun safety legislation, and I would have to agree with both of them. They've both been inconsistent when it comes to this issue. I'm the one candidate on this stage that actually brought people together to pass comprehensive gun safety legislation. This is very personal to me, being from Baltimore. I will never forget one occasion visiting a little boy in Johns Hopkins Hospital. He was getting a birthday haircut, the age of 3, when drug dealers turned that barbershop into a shooting gallery, and that boy's head was pierced with a bullet. And I remember visiting him. It did not kill him. I remember visiting him and his mother in Johns Hopkins Hospital, in his diapers with tubes running in and out of his head, same age as my little boy. So after the slaughter of the kids in Connecticut, Lester, we brought people together. We did pass in our state comprehensive gun safety legislation. It did have a ban on combat assault weapons, universal background checks. And you know what? We did not interrupt a single person's hunting season. I've never met a self-respecting deer hunter that needed an AR-15 to down a deer. And so we were able to actually do these things.
All right, Governor, thank you. Secretary Clinton, this is a community that has suffered a lot of heartache in the last year. Of course, as you mentioned, the church shootings. We won't forget the video of Walter Scott being shot in the back while running from police. We understand that a jury will decide whether that police officer was justified, but it played straight to the fears of many African-American men that their lives are cheap. Is that perception, or in your view, is it reality?
Well, sadly, it's reality. And it has been heartbreaking and incredibly outraging to see the constant stories of young men like Walter Scott, as you said, who have been killed by police officers. There needs to be a concerted effort to address the systemic racism in our criminal justice system. And that requires a very clear agenda for retraining police officers, looking at ways to end racial profiling, finding more ways to really bring the disparities that stalk our country into high relief. 1 out of 3 African-American men may well end up going to prison. That's the statistic. I want people here to think what we would be doing if it was 1 out of 3 white men. And very often the black men are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for offenses that do not lead to the same results for white men. So we have a very serious problem that we can no longer ignore.
Your time is up. Senator Sanders, my next question is actually my next question is for you.
Let me respond to what the Secretary said. We have a criminal justice system which is broken. Who in America is satisfied that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, disproportionately African American and Latino? Who is satisfied that 51% of African American young people are either unemployed or underemployed? Who is satisfied that millions of people have police records for possessing marijuana when the CEOs of Wall Street companies who destroyed our economy have no police records.
Senator Sanders.
So we need to take a very hard look at our criminal justice system, investing in jobs and education, not in jails and incarceration.
Just over a week ago, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus endorsed Secretary Clinton, not you. He said that choosing her over you was not a hard decision. In fact, our polling shows she's beating you more than 2-to-1 among minority voters. How can you be the nominee if you don't have that support?
Well, let me talk about polling. As Secretary Clinton well knows, when this campaign began, she was 50 points ahead of me. We were all of 3 percentage points. Guess what? In Iowa, New Hampshire, the race is very, very close. Maybe we're ahead in New Hampshire. In terms of polling, guess what? We are running ahead of Secretary Clinton in terms of taking on my good friend Donald Trump, beating him by 19 points in New Hampshire, 13 points in the last national poll that I saw. To answer your question, when the African-American community becomes familiar with my congressional record and with our agenda and with our views on the economy and criminal justice, just as the general population has become more supportive, so will the African-American community, so will the Latino community. We have the momentum. We're on a path toward victory.
Google's, actually, Governor, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Google searches for the words Black Lives Matter surpassed civil rights movement last year. And here in South Carolina, Black Lives Matter was the #1 trending political issue. Governor O'Malley, you've campaigned on your record as governor of Maryland and before that the mayor of Baltimore. Last year, of course, Baltimore was rocked by violent unrest in the wake of the death of Freddie Gray. And right from the start of your campaign, you've been dogged by those who blame your tough-on-crime, so-called zero-tolerance policies as mayor for contributing to that unrest. What responsibility do you bear?
Yeah, let's talk about this. When I ran for mayor in 1999, Lester, it was not because our city was doing well. It was because we were burying over 300 young, poor black men every single year. And that's why I ran, because, yes, Black Lives Matter. And we did a number of things. We weren't able to make our city immune from setbacks, as the Freddie Gray unrest and tragic death showed. But we were able to save a lot of lives, doing things that actually work to improve police and community relations. The truth of the matter is we created a civilian review board, and many of these things are in the new agenda for criminal justice reform that I put forward. We created a civilian review board, gave them their own detectives. We required the reporting of discourtesy, use of excessive force, lethal force. I repealed the possession of marijuana as a crime in our state. I drove our incarceration rate down to 20-year lows and drove violent crime down to 30-year lows, and became the first governor south of the Mason-Dixon line to repeal the death penalty. I feel a responsibility every day to find things that work.
All right, let's talk more about policing and the criminal justice system. Senator Sanders, a few times tonight we're going to hear from some of the most prominent voices on YouTube, starting with Francesca Ramsey, who tackles racial stereotypes through her videos. Let's watch.
Hey, I'm Francesca Ramsey. I believe there's a huge conflict of interest when local prosecutors investigate cases of police violence within their own communities. For example, last month, the officers involved in the case of 12-year-old Tamir Rice weren't indicted. How would your presidency ensure that incidents of police violence are investigated and prosecuted fairly? Senator Sanders.
I apologize for not hearing all of that question.
Would you like me to read it back to you?
Yeah.
Prosecutors, I believe there's a huge conflict of interest when local prosecutors investigate cases of police violence within their communities. Most recently, we saw this with the non-indictment of the officers involved in the case of 12-year-old Tamir Rice. Right. How would your presidency ensure incidents of police violence are investigated and prosecuted fairly?
This is a responsibility for the U.S. Justice Department to get involved. Whenever anybody in this country is killed while in police custody, this should automatically trigger a U.S. Attorney General's investigation. Second of all, and I speak as a mayor who worked very closely and well with police officers, the vast majority of whom are honest, hardworking people trying to do a difficult job. But let us be clear. if a police officer breaks the law, like any public official, that officer must be held accountable. And thirdly, we have got to demilitarize our police departments so they don't look like occupying armies. We got to move toward community policing. And fourthly, we have got to make our police departments look like the communities they serve in their diversity.
Secretary Clinton, this question is for you. Tonight, parts of America are in the grip of a deadly heroin epidemic spanning race and class, hitting small towns and cities alike. It's become a major issue in this race. In a lot of places where you've been campaigning, despite an estimated $1 trillion spent, many say the war on drugs has failed. So what would you do?
Well, Lester, you're right. Everywhere I go to campaign, I'm meeting families who are affected by the drug problem that mostly is opioids and heroin now, and lives are being lost and children are being orphaned. And I've met a lot of grandparents who are now taking care of grandchildren. So I have tried to come out with a comprehensive approach that, number one, does tell the states that we will work with you from the federal government, putting more money, about $1 billion a year, to help states have a different approach to dealing with this epidemic. The policing needs to change. Police officers must be equipped with the antidote to a heroin overdose or an opioid overdose known as Narcan. They should be able to administer it, so should firefighters and others. We have to move away from treating the use of drugs as a crime and instead move it to where it belongs, as a health issue. And we need to divert more people from the criminal justice system into drug courts, into treatment and recovery.
And that's time.
So this is the kind of approach that we should take in dealing with what is now a growing epidemic.
Senator Sanders, would you like to respond?
Sure. I agree with everything the Secretary said, but let me just add this. There is a responsibility on the part of the pharmaceutical industry and the drug companies who are producing all of these drugs and not looking at the consequence of it. And second of all, when we talk about addiction being a disease, the Secretary is right. What that means is we need a revolution in this country in terms of mental health treatment. People should be able to get the treatment that they need when they need it, not 2 months from now, which is why I believe in universal health care with mental health.
Time. We're going to get into all that coming up, but we're going to take a break. We need to take a break, and when we come back, the anger brewing in America. Last week, Secretary Clinton called you, quote, a pretty reliable vote for the gun lobby. Right before the debate, you changed your position on immunity from lawsuits for gun manufacturers. Can you tell us why?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton knows that what she says is very disingenuous. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. I was in 1988. There were 3 candidates running for Congress in the state of Vermont. I stood up to the gun lobby and came out and maintained the position that in this country, we should not be selling military-style assault weapons. I have supported from day one an instant background check to make certain that people who should not have guns do not have guns.
Welcome back from Charleston. Let's turn to another area where there's been fierce disagreement. That would be health care. Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton, you both mentioned it in your 100-day priorities. Let's turn to my colleague Andrea Mitchell now to lead that questioning.
Thank you, Lester. Secretary Clinton, Senator Sanders favors what he calls Medicare for all. Now, you've said that what he is proposing would tear up Obamacare and replace it. Secretary Clinton, is it really fair to say that Bernie Sanders wants to kill Obamacare?
Well, Andrea, I am absolutely committed to universal health care. I've worked on this for a long time. People may remember that I took on the health insurance industry back in the 90s, and I didn't quit until we got the Children's Health Insurance Program that insures 8 million kids. And I certainly respect Senator Sanders' intentions. But when you're talking about health care, the details really matter, and therefore we have been raising questions about the 9 bills that he introduced over 20 years as to how they would work and what would be the impact on people's health care. He didn't like that. His campaign didn't like it either, and tonight he's come out with a new health care plan. And again, we need to get into the details, but here's what I believe. The Democratic Party in the United States worked since Harry Truman to get the Affordable Care Act passed. We finally have a path to universal health care. We've accomplished so much already. I do not want to see the Republicans repeal it, and I don't want to see us start over again with a contentious debate. I want us to defend and build on the Affordable Care Act and improve it.
Okay.
Senator Sanders.
Secretary Clinton didn't answer your question. Because what her campaign was saying, Bernie Sanders, who has fought for universal health care for my entire life, he wants to end Medicare, end Medicaid, end the Children's Health Insurance Program. That is nonsense. What a Medicare for All program does is finally provide in this country health care for every man, woman, and child as a right. Now, the truth is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, you know what they believed in? They believed that health care should be available to all of our people. I'm on the committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act. I made the Affordable Care Act, along with Jim Clyburn, a piece of legislation. I voted for it. But right now, what we have to deal with is the fact that 29 million people still have no health insurance. We are paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, getting ripped off. And here's the important point. We are spending far more per person on health care than the people of any other country. My proposal, provide health care to all people, get private insurance out of health insurance, lower the cost of health care for middle-class families by $5,000. That's the vision we need to take.
Well, if I can, you know, I have to say I'm not sure whether we're talking about the plan you just introduced tonight or we're talking about the plan you introduced 9 times in the Congress, but the fact is we have the Affordable Care Act. That is one of the greatest accomplishments of President Obama, of the Democratic Party, and of our country, and we have already seen 19 million Americans get insurance. We have seen the end of pre-existing conditions keeping people from getting insurance. We have seen women no longer paying more for our insurance than men, and we have seen young people up to the age of 26 being able to stay on their parents' policy. Now, there are things we can do to improve it, but to tear it up and start over again, pushing our country back into that kind of a contentious debate, I think is the wrong direction.
I have to talk about something that's actually working in our state.
No one is tearing this up. We're going to go forward. But what the Secretary neglected to mention, not just the 29 million still have no health insurance, that even more are underinsured with huge co-payments and deductibles. Tell me why we are spending almost 3 times more than the British, who guarantee health care to all of their people. 50% more than the French, more than the Canadians. The vision from FDR and Harry Truman was health care for all people as a right in a cost-effective way. We're not going to tear up the Affordable Care Act. I helped write it. But we are going to move on top of that to a Medicare for all system.
Andrea, instead of Andrea, I think instead of attacking one another on health care, we should be talking about the things that are actually working. In our state, we have moved to an all-payer system. With the Affordable Care Act, we now have moved all of our acute care hospitals, that driver of cost at the center, away from fee-for-service and actually to pay. We pay them based on how well they keep patients out of the hospital, how well they keep their patients. That's the future. We need to build on the Affordable Care Act, do the things that work, and reduce costs and increase access.
And that's exactly what we are able to do based on the foundation of the Affordable Care Act. What Governor O'Malley just said is one of the models that we will be looking at to make sure we do get costs down. We do limit a lot of the unnecessary costs that we still have in the system. But with all due respect, to start over again with a whole new debate is something that I think would set us back. The Republicans just voted last week to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and thank goodness President Obama vetoed it and saved Obamacare for the American people.
Senator Sanders, let me ask you this, though.
Yeah.
You've talked about Medicare for all,
Yes.
and tonight you've released a very detailed plan.
Not
Just
all that detailed because-
2 hours before the debate, you did.
Well.
But let me ask you about Vermont, because in Vermont, you tried in the state of Vermont, and Vermont walked away from this kind of idea of Medicare for all, single payer, because they concluded it would require major tax increases.
You might
and
wanna
by
ask-
some estimates, it would double the budget. If you
Andrea,
couldn't sell
let me
it in
just say
Vermont,
this. Let me
Senator,
just say that.
how
You might
can
want to
sell it
ask the
to
governor of
country?
the state of Vermont why he could not do it. I'm not the governor. I'm the senator from the state of Vermont. But second of all, here is what the real point is. In terms of all of the issues you've raised, the good questions you've raised, you know what it all comes down to? Do you know why we can't do what every other country, major country on earth is doing? It's because we have a campaign finance system that is corrupt. We have super PACs. We have the pharmaceutical industry pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into campaign contributions and lobbying, and the private insurance companies as well. What this is really about is not the rational way to go forward. It's Medicare for all. It is whether we have the guts to stand up to the private insurance companies and all of their money and the pharmaceutical industry. That's what this debate should be about.
Well, as someone who has a little bit of experience standing up to the health insurance industry that spent, many millions of dollars attacking me, and probably will so again because of what I believe we can do building on the Affordable Care Act, I think it's important to point out that there are a lot of reasons we have the health care system we have today. I know how much money influences the political decision-making. That's why I'm for huge campaign finance reform. However, we started a system that had private health insurance, and even during the Affordable Care Act debate, there was an opportunity to vote for what was called the public option. In other words, people could buy into Medicare. And even when the Democrats were in charge of the Congress, we couldn't get the votes for that. So what I'm saying is really simple. This has been the fight of the Democratic Party for decades. We have the Affordable Care Act. Let's make it work. Let's take the models that states are doing. We now have driven costs down to the lowest they've been in 50 years. Now we've got to get individual costs down. That's what I'm planning to do.
And that's time. We're going to take a turn now. Secretary Clinton, in his final State of the Union address, President Obama said his biggest regret was his inability to bring the country together. If President Obama couldn't do it, how will you?
Great question.
Well, I think it's an important point the president made in his State of the Union. And here's what I would say. I will go anywhere to meet with anyone at any time to find common ground. That's what I did as a First Lady when I worked with both Democrats and Republicans to get the Children's Health Insurance Program. When I worked with Tom DeLay, one of the most partisan of Republicans, to reform the adoption and foster care system. What I did working in the Senate, where I crossed the aisle often, working even with the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, to get TRICARE for National Guardsmen and women. And it's what I did as Secretary of State on numerous occasions, and most particularly rounding up 2/3 votes in order to pass a treaty that lowered the nuclear weapons in both Russia and the United States. So I know it's hard. but I also know you've got to work at it every single day. I look out here, I see a lot of my friends from the Congress, and I know that they work at it every single day, because maybe you can only find a little sliver of common ground to cooperate with somebody from the other party, but who knows, if you're successful there, maybe you can build even more. That's what I will do.
Senator Sanders' response?
A couple of years ago, when we understood that veterans were not getting the quality care they needed in a timely manner, I worked with folks like John McCain and others to pass the most comprehensive veterans health care legislation in modern history. But let me rephrase your question, because I think, if, in all due respect, your expression, in all due respect, you're missing the main point. And the main point in the Congress is not that Republicans and Democrats hate each other. That's a mythology from the media. The real issue is that Congress is owned by big money and refuses to do what the American people want them to do. The real issue is that in area after area, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the American people want it. Rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, creating 13 million jobs, the American people want it. Pay equity for women, the American people want it. Demanding that the wealthy start paying their fair share of taxes, the American people want it.
That's time, but let me continue with you.
We have got to make Congress respond to the needs of the people, not big money.
Senator Sanders, let me continue. You call yourself a democratic socialist, and throughout your career in politics, you've been critical of the Democratic Party, even saying in a book you wrote, quote, there wasn't a hell of a big difference between the two major parties. How will you win a general election labeling yourself a democratic socialist?
Because what I believe and what I was just saying, the Democratic Party needs major reform. To those of you in South Carolina, you know what, in Mississippi, we need a 50-state strategy so that people in South Carolina and Mississippi can get the resources that they need. Instead of being dependent on super PACs, what we need is to be dependent on small individual campaign contributors. We need an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and low-income people, not wealthy campaign contributors.
Yeah, but
we
Senator,
We need to expand what the input into the Democratic Party. I am very proud that in this campaign, we have seen an enormous amount of excitement from young people, from working people. We have received more individual contributions than any candidate in the history of this country up to this point.
Yeah, but Senator, you never came to campaign for Vincent Shaheen when he was running for governor. In fact, neither of you came to campaign for Vincent Shaheen when he was running for governor. We can talk all we want about wanting to build a stronger Democratic Party. But Lester, the question you answered, there's no laughing matter. The most recurring question I get when I stand on the chair all across Iowa and talk with my neighbors is, how are you going to heal the divisions and the wounds in our country? This is the biggest challenge we face as a people. All my life, I've brought people together over deep divides and very old wounds. And that's what we need now in a new leader. We cannot keep talking past each other, declaring all Republicans are our enemies, or the war is all about being against millionaires or billionaires, or it's all against American Muslims or all against immigrants. Look, as Frederick Douglass said, we are one. Our cause is one. And we must help each other if we're going to succeed.
I
respectfully disagree.
Secretary Clinton, my next question is for you. Here's another question from...
disagree with my friend over here, and that is, you are right. All of us have denounced Trump's attempt to divide this country, the anti-Latino rhetoric, the racist rhetoric, the anti-Muslim rhetoric. But where I disagree with you, Governor O'Malley, is I do believe we have to deal with the fundamental issues of a handful of billionaires who control the economic and political life of this country.
I agree.
Nothing real will happen unless we have a political revolution where millions of people finally stand up.
We're going to get into that coming up. But Secretary Clinton, here's another question from YouTube. It's from a young video blogger who has over 5 million subscribers. He has a question about the importance of younger voters.
Hi, I'm Connor Franta. I'm 23, and my audience is around the same age. Getting my generation's vote should be a priority for any presidential candidate. Now, I know Senator Sanders is pretty popular among my peers, but what I want to know is, how are all of you planning on engaging us further in this election?
Secretary Clinton.
Well, thanks for the question, and congratulations on 5 million viewers on YouTube. That's quite an accomplishment. Look, this election is mostly about the future, and therefore it is of greatest urgency for young people. I've laid out my ideas about what we can do to make college affordable, how we can help people pay off their student debt and save thousands of dollars, how we can create more good jobs, because a lot of the young people that I talk with are pretty disappointed about the economic prospects they feel they're facing. So making community college free, making it possible to attend a public college or university with debt-free tuition, looking for ways to protect our rights, especially from the concerted Republican assault on voting rights, on women's rights, on gay rights, on civil rights, on workers' rights. And I know how much young people value their independence, their autonomy, and their rights. So I think this is an election where we have to pull young people and older people together to have a strategy about how we're going to encourage even more Americans to vote, because it is absolutely clear to me that turning over our White House to the Republicans would be bad for everybody, especially young people.
A quick follow-up, a 30-second follow-up. Why is Senator Sanders beating you 2-1 among younger voters?
Look, I have the greatest respect for Senator Sanders and for his supporters, and I'm going to keep working as hard as I can to reach as many people of all ages about what I will do, what the experience and the ideas that I have that I will bring to the White House, and I hope to have their support when I'm the Democratic nominee.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, big banks, big business, and big differences among the three candidates on the American economy. We'll be right back.
Everywhere I go to campaign, I'm meeting families who are affected by the drug problem that mostly is opioids and heroin now, and lives are being lost and children are being orphaned. And I've met a lot of grandparents who are now taking care of grandchildren. So I have tried to come out with a comprehensive approach that, number one, does tell the states that we will work with you from the federal government, putting more money, about $1 billion a year, to help states have a different approach to dealing with this epidemic. The policing needs to change. Police officers must be equipped with the antidote to a heroin overdose or an opioid overdose, known as Narcan. They should be able to administer it, so should firefighters and others. We have to move away from treating the use of drugs as a crime and instead move it to where it belongs, as a health issue.
welcome back from Charleston. Let's turn now to the economy. Senator Sanders, you released a tough new ad last week in which, without mentioning Secretary Clinton by name, you talk about two Democratic visions for regulating Wall Street. Quote, one says it's okay to take millions from big banks and tell them what to do. My plan, break up the big banks, close the tax loopholes, and make them pay their fair share. What do you see as the difference between what you would do about the banks and what Secretary Clinton would do?
The first difference is I don't take money from big banks. I don't get personal speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. What I would do is understand that when you have 3 out of the 4 largest banks today bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, when you have the 6 largest financial institutions having assets of 60% of the GDP of America, it is very clear to me what you have to do. You got to bring back a 21st century Glass-Steagall legislation, and you got to break up these huge financial institutions. They have too much economic power, and they have too much financial power over our entire economy. If Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, the old Republican trust buster, what he would say is, these guys are too powerful, break them up. I believe that's what the American people want to see. That's my view.
Secretary Clinton, help the voter understand the daylight between the two of you here.
Well, there's no daylight on the basic premise that there should be no bank too big to fail and no individual too powerful to jail. We agree on that. But where we disagree is the comments that Senator Sanders has made that don't just affect me, I can take that, but he's criticized President Obama for taking donations from Wall Street. And President Obama has led our country out of the Great Recession. Senator Sanders called him weak, disappointing. He even in 2011 publicly sought someone to run in a primary against President Obama. Now, I personally believe that President Obama's work to push through the Dodd-Frank bill and then to sign it was one of the most important regulatory schemes we've had since the 1930s. So I'm going to defend Dodd-Frank, and I'm going to defend President Obama for taking on Wall Street, taking on the financial industry, and getting results.
Senator Sanders, a response.
Set the record right. In 2006, when I ran for the Senate, Senator Barack Obama was kind enough to campaign for me. 2008, I did my best to see that he was elected, and in 2012, I worked as hard as I could to see that he was reelected. He and I are friends. We've worked together on many issues. We have some differences of opinion. But here is the issue. Secretary touched on it. Can you really reform Wall Street when they are spending millions and millions of dollars on campaign contributions, and when they are providing speaker fees to individuals? So it's easy to say, well, I'm going to do this and do that. But I have doubts when people receive huge amounts of money from Wall Street. I am very proud. I do not have a super PAC. I do not want Wall Street's money. I'll rely on the middle class and working families for my campaign contributions.
I have a question for you.
You know, I think since Senator Sanders followed up on this,
response.
Your profusion of comments about your feelings toward President Obama are a little strange given what you said about him in 2011. But look, I have a plan that most commentators have said is tougher, more effective, and more comprehensive.
That's not true.
It builds on the Dodd-Frank. Yes, it is. It builds on the Dodd-Frank regulatory scheme, but it goes much further because both the governor and the senator have focused only on the big banks. Lehman Brothers, AIG, the shadow banking sector were as big a problem in what caused the Great Recession. I go after them, and I can tell you that the hedge fund billionaires who are running ads against me right now, and Karl Rove, who started running an ad against me right now, funded by money from the financial services sector, sure think I'm the one they don't want to be up against.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lester, what Secretary Clinton just said is actually not true. What I have put forward a plan that would actually put cops back on the beat of Wall Street. I have put forward a plan that was heralded as very comprehensive and realistic. Look, if a bank robber robs a bank and all you do is slap him on the wrist, he's just going to keep robbing banks again. The same thing is true with people in suits. Secretary Clinton, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. But for you to say there's no daylight on this between the three of us is also not true. I support reinstituting a modern version of Glass-Steagall that would include going after the shadow banks, requiring capital requirements that would force them to no longer put us on the hook for these sorts of things. In prior debates, I've heard you even bring up, now you bring up President Obama here in South Carolina in defense of the fact of your cozy relationship with Wall Street. In an earlier debate, I heard you bring up even the 9/11, 9/11 victims to defend it. The truth of the matter is, Secretary Clinton, you do not go as far as reining in Wall Street as I would. And the fact of the matter is the people of America deserve to have a president that's on their side, protecting the Main Street economy from excesses on Wall Street, and we're
Secretary
just as vulnerable
Clinton,
today.
30-second response.
Yes, well, First of all, Paul Krugman, Barney Frank, others have all endorsed my plan. Secondly, we have Dodd-Frank. It gives us the authority already to break up big banks that pose a risk to the financial sector. I want to go further and add to that. And, you know, Governor, you have raised money on Wall Street. You raised a lot of money on Wall Street when you were the head of the Democratic Governors Association.
Yeah, but I haven't gotten a penny this year, so somebody please go on to MartinO'Malley.com. Go on to MartinO'Malley.com. Send me your checks. They're not giving me zero.
The point is that if we're going to be serious about this and not just try to score political points, we should know what's in Dodd-Frank. And what's in Dodd-Frank already gives the president the authority with his regulators to make those decisions.
How corrupt this system is. Goldman Sachs recently fined $5 billion. Goldman Sachs has given this country 2 secretaries of Treasury, one on the Republicans, one on the Democrats.
Say it.
The leader of Goldman Sachs is a billionaire who comes to Congress and tells us we should cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Secretary Clinton, and you're not the only one, so I don't mean to just point the finger at you. You've received over $600,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs in 1 year. I find it very strange that a major financial institution that pays $5 billion in fines for breaking the law, not one of their executives is prosecuted, while kids who smoke marijuana get a jail sentence.
That's time, Andrea.
Well, the last point on this is, Senator Sanders, you're the only one on this stage that voted to deregulate the financial market in 2000, to take the cops off the street, to use Governor O'Malley's phrase, to make the SEC and the Commodities Futures Trading Commission no longer able to regulate swaps and derivatives, which were one of the main cause of the collapse in 08. So there's plenty of problems that we all have to face together. And the final thing I would say, we're at least having a vigorous debate about reining in Wall Street. The Republicans want to give them more power and repeal Dodd-Frank. That's what we need to stop.
Who wants to check my record? Anyone who wants to check my record in taking on Wall Street, in fighting against the deregulation of Wall Street, when Wall Street put billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions to get the government off their backs. They got the government off their backs. Turns out that they were crooks and they destroyed our economy. I think it's time to put the government back on their backs.
Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, we've talked a lot about things you want to do. You want free education for everyone. You want the federal minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. You want to expand Social Security benefits. You've been specific about what you want, but let's talk about how to pay for all this. You now said that you would raise taxes today, 2 hours or so ago. You've said you would raise taxes to pay for your health care plan. You haven't been specific about how to pay for the other things. Will you tell us tonight?
Good. You're right. I want to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, create 13 million jobs. We do that by doing away with the absurd loophole that now allows major profitable corporations to stash their money in the Cayman Islands and not in some years pay a nickel in taxes. Yes, I do. I plead guilty. I want every kid in this country who has the ability to be able to go to a public college or university tuition free. And by the way, I want to substantially lower student debt interest rates in this country as well. How do I pay for it? I pay for it through a tax on Wall Street speculation. This country and the middle class bailed out Wall Street. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class. In fact, we have documented, unlike Secretary Clinton, I have documented exactly how I would pay for our ambitious agenda.
Andrea, I'm the only person on this stage today.
So Secretary Clinton, you want to respond?
Well, I have actually documented every way that I'm going to pay for what I'm doing because I think the American public deserves to know, and you can go to my website and actually see that. But there are serious questions about how we're going to pay for what we want to see our country do. And I'm the only candidate standing here tonight who has said, I will not raise taxes on the middle class. I want to raise incomes, not taxes. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the wealthy pay for debt-free tuition, for child care, for paid family leave. To help us bring down student debt, we're going to refinance that student debt, saving kids thousands of dollars. Yeah, and that will also come out of some of the pockets of people in the financial services industry.
Sanders,
but I will tell you exactly how I pay for everything I propose.
Here is the major point.
Let me ask you a question about taxes, because the most Googled political issue in the last month was taxes. Now, in your health care plan, the plan you released tonight, you would not only raise taxes on the wealthy. The details you released indicate you would raise taxes on the middle class also. Is that correct?
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care. And she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
Senator, let me just follow up on that, because on Meet the Press on December 20th, you said that you would only raise taxes on the middle class to pay for family leave. And having said that, now you say you're going to raise middle-class taxes to pay for health care as well. Is that breaking your word?
No, it is not breaking my word. When you are, it's one thing to say I'm raising taxes. It's another thing to say that we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So if I save you $10,000 in private health insurance and you pay a little bit more in taxes, in total, there are huge savings in what your family is spending.
Senator, I'm the only person on this stage that's actually balanced a budget every year for 15 years.
I was mayor for 8 years. I did that as well.
Okay, so that was 8 years. Yes. And Senator, but I actually did it during a budget downtime, I mean, during a recession. And Andrea, I had to make more cuts than any governor in the history of the state of Maryland, but we invested more in infrastructure, more in transportation. We made our public schools #1 in America 5 years in a row. and went 4 years in a row without a penny's increase to college tuition. The things that we need to do in our country, like debt-free college in the next 5 years, like making national service a universal option in order to cut youth unemployment in half in the next 3 years. All of these things can be done if we eliminate one entitlement we can no longer afford as a nation. And that is the entitlement that the super wealthy among us, those making more than $1 million, feel that they are entitled to paying a much lower marginal tax rate than was usual for the better part of these 80 years. And if we tax earnings from investments on money, namely capital gains, at the same rate as we tax earnings from sweat and hard work and toil, we can make the investments we need to make our country better.
We've got a lot of ground to cover here. Many Democratic voters are passionate about the need to do something to combat the threat of climate change, including the team of scientists from YouTube's Minute Earth channel. Here's their take.
Hello from Minute Earth. Fossil fuels have long kept our cars moving and our light bulbs lit. But we now know that burning these fuels releases heat-trapping gases that are warming the planet, causing seas to rise and contributing to extreme weather events like South Carolina's devastating flooding last year. Fighting human-caused climate change means giving up our global addiction to fossil fuels and shifting the bulk of the world's energy supply to alternative sources. Some countries have acted decisively to make this transition, but here at home we still get a whopping 82% of our energy from coal, oil, and natural gas. In the U.S., political gridlock, pressure from industry lobbyists, and insufficient R&D have made an already tough battle against climate change even tougher.
Senator Sanders, Americans love their SUVs, which spiked in sales last year as gas prices plummeted. How do you convince Americans that the problem of climate change is so urgent that they need to change their behavior?
I think we already are. Younger generation understands it instinctively. I was home in Burlington, Vermont on Christmas Eve. The temperature was 65 degrees. People in Vermont know what's going on. People who did ice fishing where their ice is no longer there on the lake understand what's going on. I'm on both the environmental and energy committees. The debate is over. Climate change is real. It is already causing major problems. And if we do not act boldly and decisively, a bad situation will become worse. It is amazing to me, and I think we'll have agreement on this up here, that we have a major party called the Republican Party that is so owned by the fossil fuel industry and their campaign contributions that they don't even have the courage, the decency to listen to the scientists. It is beyond my comprehension how we can elect the President of the United States, somebody like Trump, who believes that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese. Bottom line is, we need to be bold and decisive. We can create millions of jobs. We must, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. I've got the most comprehensive legislation in the Senate to do that, and as president, I will fight to make that happen.
Governor O'Malley, 30 seconds, sir.
Thank you. Lester, on this stage tonight, this Democratic stage, where we actually believe in science, I would like to challenge and invite my colleagues here on this stage to join me in putting forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric energy grid by 2050. It can be done with solar, with wind, with new technologies, with green buildings. This can happen, but President Obama made us more energy independent. But an all-of-the-above strategy didn't land us on the moon. We need American ingenuity, and we need to reach this goal by 2050 for the sake of our kids.
That's time. We're going to take a break. When we return, the late-breaking developments regarding Iran. The threat of ISIS now more real than ever on U.S. soil. Americans in fear and hearing few good answers. We'll be right back. You call yourself a democratic socialist, and throughout your career in politics, you've been critical of the Democratic Party, even saying in a book you wrote, quote, there wasn't a hell of a big difference between the two major parties. How will you win a general election labeling yourself a democratic socialist?
Because what I believe and what I was just saying, the Democratic Party needs major reform. To those of you in South Carolina, you know what, in Mississippi, we need a 50-state strategy, so that people in South Carolina and Mississippi can get the resources that they need. instead of being dependent on super PACs, what we need is to be dependent on small individual campaign contributors. We need an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and low-income people.
The most recurring question I get when I stand on the chair all across Iowa and talk with my neighbors is, how are you going to heal the divisions and the wounds in our country? This is the biggest challenge we face as a people. All my life, I've brought people together over deep divides and very old wounds, and that's what we need now in a new leader. We cannot keep talking past each other, declaring all Republicans are our enemies, or the war is all about being against millionaires or billionaires, or it's all against American Muslims, or all against immigrants. Look, as Frederick Douglass said, we are one. Our cause is one, and we must help each other if we're going to succeed.
We are back. I'm Chuck Todd. We are just past the halfway mark in our NBC News YouTube Democratic candidates debate. Boy, this is one that has actually lived up to the billing. We've seen some sharp exchanges on guns, health care, and Wall Street. It's a debate, you could argue, that has been largely focused on all things Bernie Sanders. He was on the defensive early, Hillary Clinton getting, I think, some control on the gun issue. But on health care and on Wall Street reform, it was Hillary Clinton on the defensive and was a very aggressive Bernie Sanders. One thing of note here, Bernie Sanders very much being the sort of revolutionary candidate, major change. And you've heard a lot of Hillary Clinton saying things like, she wants to build on the things that President Obama did, wrapping herself in President Obama. Let's go back downstairs and check in with our moderators, Lester and Andrea. So what's coming up next, guys?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we're going to be talking about ISIS, a threat to America. It's always posed as one of the top concerns of Americans, and also some more late-breaking news.
We have all of the news that has happened from Iran and the president's comments today, as well as what this means going forward for the war on terror. What do we expect from Iran, and also what's happening in Syria? So a lot of foreign policy coming up.
A lot of debate to come. We'll be back from Charleston after this.
You got it. Well, it's the Commander-in-Chief test. That's what's next. Stay with us. The debate resumes right after this.
Where we disagree is the comments that Senator Sanders has made that don't just affect me, I can take that, but he's criticized President Obama for taking donations from Wall Street. And President Obama has led our country out of the Great Recession. Senator Sanders called him weak, disappointing. He even in 2011 publicly sought someone to run in a primary against President Obama. Now, I personally believe that President Obama's work to push through the Dodd-Frank bill and then to sign it was one of the most important regulatory schemes we've had since the 1930s. So I'm going to defend Dodd-Frank, and I'm going to defend President Obama for taking on Wall Street, taking on the financial industry, and getting results.
Charleston, Andrea Mitchell has questions now for the candidates, starting with Iran.
Thank you, Lester. Senator Sanders, the nuclear deal is now in force. Iran is getting its billions of dollars. Several Americans who had been held are now going to be heading home. The president said today it's a good day for diplomacy. Is it time now to restore diplomatic relations for the first time since 1979 and actually reopen a U.S. embassy in Tehran?
I think what we have got to do is move as aggressively as we can to normalize relations with Iran, understanding that Iran's behavior in so many ways is something that we disagree with. Their support for terrorism, the anti-American rhetoric that we're hearing from some of their leadership is something that is not acceptable. On the other hand, the fact that we managed to reach an agreement, something that I very strongly supported, that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and that we did that without going to war, and that I believe we're seeing a thaw in our relationships with Iran is a very positive step. So if your question is, do I want to see that relationship become more positive in the future? Yes. Can I tell you that we should open an embassy in Tehran tomorrow? No, I don't think we should. But I think the goal has got to be, as we have done with Cuba, to move and warm relations with a very powerful and important country in this world.
Your response, Secretary Clinton.
Well, I'm very proud of the Iran nuclear agreement. I was very pleased to be part of what the president put into action when he took office. I was responsible for getting those sanctions imposed, which put the pressure on Iran that brought them to the negotiating table, which resulted in this agreement. And so they have been, so far, following their requirements under the agreement. But I think we still have to carefully watch them. We've had one good day over 36 years, and I think we need more good days before we move more rapidly toward any kind of normalization. And we have to be sure that they are truly going to implement the agreement, and then we have to go after them on a lot of their other bad behavior in the region, which is causing enormous problems in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and elsewhere.
Well, you mentioned Syria. Let me ask you about Syria, all of you. Let's turn to Syria, the civil war that has been raging there. Are there any circumstances in which you could see deploying significant numbers of ground forces in Syria, not just special forces, special operators, but significant ground forces to combat ISIS in a direct combat role? Let me start with you, Secretary Clinton.
Absolutely not. I have a three-point plan that does not include American ground forces. It includes the United States leading an air coalition, which is what we are doing, supporting fighters on the ground, the Iraqi army, which is beginning to show more ability, the Sunni fighters that we are now helping to reconstitute, and Kurdish fighters on both sides of the border. I think we also have to try to disrupt their supply chain of foreign fighters and foreign money, and we do have to contest them in online space. So I'm very committed to both going after ISIS, but also supporting what Secretary Kerry is doing to try to move on a political, diplomatic course to try to begin to slow down and hopefully end the carnage in Syria, which is the root of so many of the problems that we see in the region and beyond.
Senator Sanders, ground forces, yes or no?
As everybody here knows, this is an incredibly complicated and difficult issue, and I applaud. I know President Obama's been getting a lot of criticism on this. I think he is doing the right thing. What the nightmare is, which many of my Republican colleagues appear to want, is to not have learned the lesson of Iraq, to get American young men and women involved in perpetual warfare in the quagmire of Syria and the Middle East would be an unmitigated disaster that, as president, I will do everything in my power to avoid.
Andrea,
we should learn from King Abdullah of Jordan, one of the few heroes in a very unheroic place. And what Abdullah said is this is a war for the soul of Islam, and that Muslim troops should be on the ground with our support and the support of other major countries. That is how we destroy ISIS. not with American troops in perpetual warfare.
Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. Andrea, governors have led us to victory in 2 world wars by doing what America does best, and that is by joining forces with others, by acting in coalition. And I believe that President Obama is doing the right thing in this case. We need to learn the lessons from the past. We do need to provide the special ops advisors. We do need to provide the technical support. But over the long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground. We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
I have a question for Senator Sanders. Did the policies of the Obama administration, in which Secretary Clinton, of course, was a part, create a vacuum in Iraq and Syria that helped ISIS grow?
No, I think the vacuum was created by the disastrous war in Iraq, which I vigorously opposed. Not only did I vote against it, I helped lead the opposition. And what happened there is, yeah, it's easy to get rid of a 2-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get them and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it.
Secretary Clinton, I want to talk to you about red lines, because former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said in a recent interview that President Obama's decision to stand down on planned missile strikes against Damascus after Assad had used chemical weapons hurt the president's credibility. Should the president have stuck to his red line once he drew it?
Look, I think that the president's decision to go after the chemical weapons, once there was a potential opportunity to build on when the Russians opened that door, resulted in a very positive outcome. We were able to get the chemical weapons out. I know from my own experience as Secretary of State that we were deeply worried about Assad's forces using chemical weapons, because it would have had not only a horrific effect on people in Syria, but it could very well have affected the surrounding states, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey. So getting those chemical weapons out was a big deal.
Should he have stuck to his line? Did it hurt U.S. credibility?
I think as Commander-in-Chief, you've got to constantly be evaluating the decisions you have to make. I know a little bit about this, having spent many hours in the Situation Room advising President Obama. And I want to just add to something that Senator Sanders said. The United States had a very big interest in trying to help stabilize the region. If there is any blame to be spread around, it starts with the Prime Minister of Iraq, who sectarianized his military, setting Shia against Sunni. It is amplified by Assad, who has waged one of the bloodiest, most terrible attacks on his own people, 250,000 plus dead, millions fleeing, causing this vacuum that has been filled, unfortunately, by terrorist groups, including ISIS. So I think we are in the midst of great turmoil in this region. We have a proxy conflict going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know, one of the criticisms I've had of Senator Sanders is his suggestion that, you know, Iranian troops be used to try to end the war in Syria and go after ISIS, which I don't think would be a good idea. But overall, a lot of the forces at work in the region are ones that we cannot directly influence, but we can try to bring more help to the
Let me just suggest what happens next. Where Secretary Clinton and I think, I agree with most of what she said. But where I think we do have an honest disagreement is that in the incredible quagmire of Syria, where it's hard to know who's fighting who, and if you give arms to this guy, it may end up in ISIS's hands the next day. We all know that. And we all know, no argument, the Secretary is absolutely right. Assad is a butcher of his own people, man using chemical weapons against his own people. This is beyond disgusting. But I think in terms of our priorities in the region, our first priority must be the destruction of ISIS. Our second priority must be getting rid of Assad through some political settlement, working with Iran, working with Russia. But the immediate task is to bring all interests together who want to destroy ISIS, including Russia, including Iran, including our Muslim allies, to make that the major priority.
But in all of that, Senator and Secretary, I think we're leaving out something very important here. And that is that we still don't have the human intelligence, overt in terms of diplomatic intelligence or covert, to understand even what the heck happens as the secondary and tertiary effects of some of these things. We are walking through this region, Andrea, without the human intelligence that we need. And we need to make a renewed investment as a country into bringing up a new generation of foreign service officers and bringing up a new generation of business people and in actually understanding and having relationships in these places so we have a better sense of what the heck happens after a dictator topples and can take action to prevent another safe haven and another iteration of terror.
Your time is up.
Yes, Senator Sanders mentioned Russia a moment ago. Secretary Clinton, you famously handed Russia's foreign minister a reset button in 2009. Since then, Russia has annexed Crimea, fomented a war in Ukraine, provided weapons that downed an airliner, and launched operations, as we've just discussed, to support Assad in Syria. As president, would you hand Vladimir Putin a reset button?
Well, it would depend upon what I got for it. And I can tell you what we got in the first term. We got a New START treaty to reduce nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. We got permission to resupply our troops in Afghanistan by traveling across Russia. We got Russia to sign on to our sanctions against Iran and other very important commitments. So, look, in diplomacy, you are always trying to see how you can figure out the interests of the other to see if there isn't some way you can advance your security and your values. When Putin came back in the fall of 2011, it was very clear he came back with a mission. And I began speaking out as soon as that happened because there were some fraudulent elections held and Russians poured out into the streets to demand their freedom, and he cracked down and, in fact, accused me of fomenting it. So we now know that he has a mixed record, to say the least, and we have to figure out how to deal with him.
What's your relationship with him?
Well, my relationship with him, it's interesting. It's one I think of respect. We've had some very tough dealings with one another, and I know that he's someone that you have to continually stand up to because, like many bullies, he is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can unless you do. And we need to get the Europeans to be more willing to stand up. I was pleased they put sanctions on after Crimea and eastern Ukraine and the downing of the airliner, but we've got to be more united in preventing Putin from taking a more aggressive stance in Europe and the Middle East.
We want to turn right now to the issue of balancing national security concerns with the privacy rights of Americans. That brings us to YouTube and this question.
Hi, my name is Marquez Brownlee, and I've been making YouTube videos about electronics and gadgets for the past 7 years. I think America's future success is tied to getting all kinds of tech right. Tech companies are responsible for the encryption technology to protect personal data, but the government wants a back door into that information. So do you think it's possible to find common ground, and where do you stand on privacy versus security?
So Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. I believe whether it's a back door or a front door, that the American principle of law should still hold, that our federal government should have to get a warrant, whether they want to come through your back door or your front door. And I also agree, Lester, with Benjamin Franklin, who said no people should ever give up their privacy or their freedoms in a promise for security. So we're a collaborative people. We need collaborative leadership here with Silicon Valley and other bright people in my own state of Maryland, around NSA, that can actually figure this out. But there are certain immutable principles that will not become antique things in our country so long as we defend our country and its values and its freedoms. And one of those things is our right to be secure in our homes and our right to expect that our federal government should have to get a warrant. I also want to say that while we've made some progress on the Patriot Act, I do believe that we need an adversarial court system there. We need a public advocate. We need to develop jurisprudence so that we can develop a body of law that protects the privacy of Americans in the information and digital age.
That's time. You have all talked about what you would do fighting ISIS over there, but we've been hit in this country by homegrown terrorists, from Chattanooga to San Bernardino. The recent shooting of a police officer in Philadelphia. How are you going to fight lone wolves here, Senator
Lester,
Sanders?
year in and year out, I was the leader of the U.S.
That's a question, Senator Sanders. I wasn't clear. I apologize.
Okay. I just wanted to add, in the previous question, I voted against the USA Patriot Act for many of the reasons that Governor O'Malley mentioned. But it is not only the government that we have to worry about, it is private corporations. You would all be amazed, or maybe not, about the amount of information private companies and the government has in terms of the websites that you access, the products that you buy, where you are this very moment. And it is very clear to me that public policy has not caught up with the explosion of technology. So yes, we have to work with Silicon Valley to make sure that we do not allow ISIS to transmit information.
But in terms of lone wolves, the threat,
right. What we have got to do there is, among other things, as I was just saying, have Silicon Valley help us to make sure that information being transmitted through the internet or in other ways by ISIS is in fact discovered. But I do believe we can do that without violating the constitutional and privacy rights of the American people.
We have to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to some of the burning questions these candidates have yet to answer and are clearly eager to talk about.
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care. And she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
over the long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, "Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served two tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground." We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
I have a question.
To Charleston, as we were going to a break, Secretary Clinton, I cut you off. I'll give you 30 seconds to respond on the issue of lone wolves.
Can I get 30 seconds too?
Let's do what?
Well, I got 60 seconds.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, I wanted to say, and I'll do it quickly, I was very pleased that leaders of President Obama's administration went out to Silicon Valley last week and began exactly this conversation about what we can do consistent with privacy and security. We need better intelligence cooperation. We need to be sure that we're getting the best intelligence that we can from friends and allies around the world. And then we've got to recognize our first line of defense against lone wolf attacks is among Muslim Americans. And it is not only shameful, it is dangerous for the kinds of comments you're hearing from the Republican side. We need to be reaching out and unifying our country against terrorist attacks and lone wolves and working with Muslim Americans
Andrea
to do
has a follow-up.
Just a quick follow-up, though, Secretary Clinton. Just a moment, Governor.
Get my 30 seconds?
But Secretary Clinton, you said that the leaders from the intelligence community went to Silicon Valley. They were flatly turned down. They got nowhere.
That is not what I've heard. Let me leave it at that.
Andrea, I need to talk about Homeland Security and preparedness. Ever since the attacks of September 11th, 30 seconds, ever since the attacks of September 11th, my colleagues, Democratic and Republican mayors, Democratic and Republican governors, made me their leader on Homeland Security and preparedness. Here in the homeland, unlike combating ISIL abroad, we're almost like it's your body's immune system. It's able to protect your body against bad bugs, not necessarily because it outnumbers them, but it's better connected. The fusion centers, the biosurveillance systems, better prepared first responders. But there's another front in this battle, and it is this. That's the political front. And if Donald Trump wants to start a registry in our country of people by faith, he can start with me, and I will sign up as one who is totally opposed to his fascist appeals that wants to vilify American Muslims. That can do more damage to our democracy than anything.
All right, that's time, and we do have to move on. Secretary Clinton, this is the first time that
Can I just get a very brief response? Very brief.
30 seconds, Senator.
Okay. And I agree with what the Secretary said and what Governor O'Malley said. But here's an issue that we also should talk about. We have a $600 billion military budget. It is a budget larger than the next 8 countries. Unfortunately, much of that budget continues to fight the old Cold War with the Soviet Union. Very little of that budget, less than 10%, actually goes into fighting ISIS and international terrorism. We need to be thinking hard about making fundamental changes in the priorities of the Defense Department.
All right, Secretary Clinton, this is the first time that a spouse of a former president could be elected president. You have said that President Clinton would advise you on economic issues, but be specific if you can. Are you talking about a kitchen table role on economics, or will he have a real policy role?
Well, it'll start at the kitchen table. We'll see how it goes from there. And I'm going to have the very best advisors that I can possibly have. And when it comes to the economy and what was accomplished under my husband's leadership in the 90s, especially when it came to raising incomes for everybody and lifting more people out of poverty than at any time in recent history, you bet I'm going to ask for his ideas, I'm going to ask for his advice, and I'm going to use him as a goodwill emissary to go around the country to find the best ideas we've got. Because I do believe, as he said, everything that's wrong with America has been solved somewhere in America. We just have to do more of it, and we have to reach out, especially into poor communities and communities of color, to give more people their own chance to get ahead.
Senator Sanders, a 30-second response here.
Great ideas from Governor O'Malley, Secretary Clinton. But here's the truth. If you have an administration stacked with Wall Street appointees, you ain't going to accomplish very much. So here's a promise that I make. And I mentioned a moment ago how corrupt the system is. Goldman Sachs, paying a $5 billion fine, gives this country in recent history a Republican Secretary of Treasury, a Democratic Secretary of Treasury. Here's a promise. If elected president, Goldman Sachs is not going to bring forth a Secretary of Treasury for a Sanders administration.
Senator Sanders, let me ask you a question. You called Bill Clinton's past transgressions, quote, totally, totally, totally disgraceful and unacceptable. Senator, do you regret saying that?
I was asked a question. You know, one of the things, Andrea, and that question annoys me. I cannot walk down the street, Secretary Clinton knows this, without being told how much I have to attack Secretary Clinton. Want to get me on the front pages of the paper, I make some vicious attack. I have avoided doing that, trying to run an issue-oriented campaign. I was asked a question.
You didn't have to answer it that way, though.
Well,
why did you?
Then if I don't answer it, then there's another front page source. Yes. And I mean this seriously. You know that. We've been through this. Yes, his behavior was deplorable. Have I ever once said a word about that issue? No, I have not. I'm going to debate Secretary Clinton and Governor O'Malley on the issues facing the American people, not Bill Clinton's personal behavior.
We will take a break. We'll continue from Charleston right after this.
I'm getting ready to do something, too. I'm running for president.
Today, I'm formally entering the race for the Democratic nomination for president.
And it may very well be that that process, by the time we get through it, closes the window on mounting a realistic campaign.
Hundreds of thousands of bright, capable young people are giving up the dream of a higher education because their families do not have enough money.
Good to meet you. How old are you? Are you 3 years old? Oh.
They were all doing yoga when they heard you were in town.
Oh my gosh, I love yoga.
In 1999, you voted for the very bill that made banks bigger.
The Glass-Steagall was my very first vote. I just arrived. My dad had died in office. I was appointed to the office. It was my very first vote.
Are you saying you didn't know what you were voting for?
I just arrived at Senate.
I'd have to say the enemy soldier that threw the grenade that wounded me, but he's not around right now to talk to.
All right, time for closing statements.
The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
and other questions still lingered. And these questions lingered because previous investigations were not thorough.
It would have happened long ago. The fact of the matter is, and let's say it in our debate because you'll never hear this from that immigrant bashing carnival barker Donald Trump, the truth of the matter is,
I was sick and tired of Hillary Clinton's email. I am still sick and tired of Hillary Clinton's email. And the issue is, the problem is the front pages every day we're dealing with that. I didn't know I had so much power. But after I said that, we're not hearing much about Hillary Clinton.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And we believe Secretary Clinton will be coming around the corner any minute. But
Sorry. The first line of defense against radicalization is in the Muslim American community. I worry greatly that the rhetoric coming from the Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, is sending a message to Muslims here in the United States and literally around the world that there is a clash of civilizations, that there is some kind of Western plot or even war against Islam, which then, I believe, fans the flames of radicalization.
Senator Sanders, you fired a campaign staffer. You have sued the Democratic National Committee. All of this after your campaign acknowledged that some of your staffers, quote, irresponsibly accessed data from another campaign. The Clinton campaign called this a very egregious breach of data and ethics and said, quote, our data was stolen.
The DNC vendor screwed up. Information came to our campaign. In this case, our staff did the wrong thing. They looked at that information. As soon as we learned that they looked at that information, we fired that person. We are now doing an independent internal investigation.
Welcome back, everybody. Finally, before we go tonight, we set out here to understand points of differences between you. We believe we've learned a lot here, but before we leave, is there anything that you really wanted to say tonight that you haven't gotten a chance to say? And we'll start with Governor O'Malley. Didn't see that coming, did you?
Much, but we're going to have to get 20 minutes to do it. So, look, I believe there are many issues. And what, 60 seconds for this?
60 seconds. We'd appreciate it.
There are so many issues that we haven't been able to discuss here. We have not fully discussed immigration reform and the deplorable number of immigrant detention camps that our nation's now maintaining. We haven't discussed the shameful treatment that the people of Puerto Rico, our fellow Americans, are being treated with by these hedge funds that are working them over. We haven't discussed the fact that in our own hemisphere, we have the danger of nation-state failures because of drug traffickers in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. I guess the bottom line is this. Look, we are a great people when we act at home and abroad based on the beliefs that unite us. Our belief in the dignity of every person, our belief in our own common good. There is no challenge that is too great for us to overcome, provided we bring forward in these divided times new leadership that can heal our divides here at home and bring our principles into alignment abroad. We're on the threshold of a new era of American progress, and I believe we have only need to join forces together and cross that threshold into a new era of American prosperity.
And that's time.
Thanks a lot.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, Lester, I spent a lot of time last week being outraged by what's happening in Flint, Michigan, and I think every single American should be outraged. We've had a city in the United States of America where the population, which is poor in many ways and majority African American, has been drinking and bathing in lead-contaminated water. And the governor of that state acted as though he didn't really care. He had requests for help that he basically stonewalled. I'll tell you what, if the kids in a rich suburb of Detroit had been drinking contaminated water and being bathed in it, there would have been action. So I sent my top campaign aide down there to talk to the mayor of Flint to see what I could do to help. And I issued a statement about what we needed to do. And then I went on a TV show and I said it was outrageous that the governor hadn't acted, and within 2 hours he had. I want to be a president who takes care of the big problems and the problems that are affecting the people of our country every day.
Thank you. Senator Sanders.
What Secretary Clinton was right, and what I did, which I think is also right, is demanded the resignation of the governor. A man who acts that irresponsibly should not stay in power. Now, we are a great nation, and we've heard a lot of great ideas here tonight. But let's be honest and let's be truthful. Very little is going to be done to transform our economy and to create the kind of middle class we need unless we end a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. We have got to get rid of super PACs. We have got to get rid of Citizens United. And what we have got to do is create a political revolution which revitalizes American democracy, which brings millions of young people and working people into the political process to say loudly and clearly that the government of the United States of America belongs to all of us and not just a handful of wealthy campaign contributors.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight, shedding light on some of the differences as Americans get ready to vote. I also want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Institute and certainly my friend and colleague, Andrea Mitchell. This has been great. It's been a great, spirited conversation, and American people appreciate it. Let me turn it over to my friend Chuck Todd now. Chuck?
Lester, thank you, and a terrific job moderating this debate tonight. Andrea as well. What a lively, substantive debate. We thought there were going to be fireworks. There certainly were. You heard sort of the sharp disagreements when it comes to guns, when it comes to Wall Street reform, when it comes to health care, and even a few things on foreign policy. We're going to break all of it down here in a few minutes, but we're going to try to sneak in a short break. And when we come back, instant analysis. We'll see if we find out what the campaigns are doing. We're live right here in the Spin Room in Charleston, South Carolina.
This is the first time that a spouse of a former president could be elected president. You have said that President Clinton would advise you on economic issues, but be specific if you can. Are you talking about a kitchen table role on economics, or will he have a real policy role?
Well, it'll start at the kitchen table. We'll see how it goes from there. And I'm going to have the very best advisors that I can possibly have. And when it comes to the economy and what was accomplished under my husband's leadership in the 90s, especially when it came to raising incomes for everybody and lifting more people out of poverty than at any time in recent history, you bet I'm going to ask for his ideas, I'm going to ask for his advice, and I'm going to use him as a goodwill emissary to go around the country to find the best ideas we've got.
Yeah, it's easy to get rid of a two-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get him and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it.
Welcome back to Charleston, South Carolina. We just finished up the fourth Democratic debate of the cycle, the last one before Democrats start going to the polls in Iowa, New Hampshire. I'm joined here by Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post, a South Carolina native. And Eugene, I think this debate's going to be known as the Bernie Sanders debate.
Yeah, it was all focused on Bernie Sanders, really. What he has said in the past, what he hasn't said in the past, what he's done in the did he criticize President Obama at one point? Did he not? What is his record on guns? What are his proposals on health care? There were some very lively clashes between the two.
You know, normally when you'd say, if you were the Clinton campaign and they heard us saying, boy, this debate was all about Bernie Sanders, they would say, oh, geez, what about us? But I get the sense they're okay with that. They they want to see how he holds up in the spotlight.
Yeah, and you know, she is a very good counterpuncher. And so it was very much her counterpunching against the Sanders thesis, basically, that what we need is revolutionary change. She's not about revolutionary change. She's about evolutionary change, incremental change.
Right. Sometimes we talk about people wrapping themselves in the flag. Hillary Clinton was wrapping herself in President Obama tonight. We were looking at, there is instance after instance where it's like, I plan on building upon what President Obama did. It was Dodd-Frank, it was health care. And it was clearly designed to say, Bernie Sanders, he's not wrapping himself in Obama.
Absolutely. And there's such a historical resonance here, of course, because 8 years ago, the South Carolina primary between Obama and Clinton was perhaps the nastiest of all. And the bitterness with which they clashed at that point is in stark contrast, to say the least, with the way she embraced Obama as a person, as a leader, embraced all his policies, said, we can't do what Bernie Sanders wants to do on health care because we have to continue the Affordable Care Act.
Well, we shall see. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of what's going to be a lively final 15 days before the voting. We'll have continuing live analysis of tonight's debate on MSNBC.com. And if you missed part of this debate, you can see it again starting right now on MSNBC. For now, I'm Chuck Todd in Charleston, South Carolina. For Lester Holt and Andrea Mitchell, we say good night. Not MSNBC.com. And good evening from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm Chuck Todd. It was the debate we've been waiting for, the one that finally lived up to the hype on the Democratic side. And it seemed to be all about Bernie Sanders tonight, who was very much on offense, well, and defense. Tonight in this final debate before the voting begins in this year's presidential primary season, with the Iowa caucuses just about 2 weeks from now, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley took the stage here at the Gilliard Center in Charleston. They engaged in some heated exchanges on key issues such as health care, guns in America, and Wall Street's influence in this election. I'm being joined here in the spin room by, in this hour, by Eugene Robinson. He's, of course, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC analyst. So, Eugene, as we were talking about right at the tail end of the debate, this was the Bernie Sanders debate.
It really was. It was all about Bernie Sanders. He has proposed ideas. He's proposed revolutionary change. Hillary Clinton very much pushed back against that and push back against various aspects of Bernie Sanders' record, especially on guns. She was on the offense on the gun issue. On Wall Street, which was one of the more interesting clashes, I thought, the tables were turned in a way, and he very much went after her for taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees.
Well, let's go to some highlights here. Let's go to the highlights here. one of the first heated exchanges tonight was over health care. And here was Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders arguing over the cost of Bernie Sanders' proposal.
We have the Affordable Care Act. That is one of the greatest accomplishments of President Obama, of the Democratic Party, and of our country. And we have already seen 19 million Americans get insurance. We have seen the end of pre-existing conditions keeping people from getting insurance. We have seen women no longer paying more for our insurance than men, and we have seen young people up to the age of 26 being able to stay on their parents' policy. Now, there are things we can do to improve it, but to tear it up and start over again, pushing our country back into that kind of a contentious debate, I think is the wrong direction.
I have to talk about something that's actually working in our state.
No one is tearing this up. We're going to go forward. But what the Secretary neglected to mention, not just the 29 million still have no health insurance, that even more are underinsured with huge co-payments and deductibles. The vision from FDR and Harry Truman was health care for all people as a right in a cost-effective way. We're not going to tear up the Affordable Care Act. I helped write it. But we are going to move on top of that to a Medicare for all system.
You know, Eugene, what was interesting there about Bernie Sanders' defense of his larger proposal is some of the talking points were Republican talking points that you hear about complaints about Obamacare. Large premiums, underinsured. Where have I heard that before? Hillary Clinton, though, very much defending this whole thing. I mean, I think that was as easy of a way to show an example of what this debate was about tonight.
It was what this debate was about, and it's what these two candidates are about, really. I mean, Hillary Clinton, let's talk about her record on health care. She tried for what was essentially a single-payer system when her husband was in office. She failed at that. She has now embraced the approach President Obama took. She described it, as a matter of fact, saying we have to begin with the private insurance system the way it was and try to modify that and broaden it to include more people. And that kind of is who she is, in a way.
I want to think about the average 22-year-old. And when they hear who is getting engaged in politics, and they hear one candidate say, you know, I don't know if we can go through a healthcare debate again. Is this country ready? We have healthcare fatigue. I think the 50-year-old swing voter says, right on. I think the 22-year-old idealist says, no, I'm with that guy who wants it. I think Hillary Clinton was speaking to swing voters in the fatigue issue. And Bernie Sanders is speaking to the heart.
To his voters. His preponderantly young voters who didn't go through that fight. Really, I mean, who don't really remember even the Affordable Care Act fight necessarily as the way you and I would, and certainly didn't go through the Clinton era fight over health care and don't know that whole history, and look around the world and say, what developed country doesn't have a single payer system? And the answer is one, this one.
That's where you felt like Bernie Sanders felt like he was on offense. Now let's go to where Bernie Sanders was on defense and Hillary Clinton was on offense. On the issue of guns, it was very early in the debate. And of course, this debate featured a new position on the issue of what to do with gun manufacturers and whether they can be held liable. And we also heard a lot of talk about last summer's church massacre here, in which 9 people were killed by a race-motivated white gunman. Here's that part of that exchange.
The gun manufacturer's liability bill had some good provisions. Among other things, we prohibited ammunition that would have killed cops who had protection on. We had child safety protection for guns in that legislation. And what we also said is a small mom and pop gun shop who sells a gun legally to somebody should not be held liable if somebody does something terrible with that gun.
I have made it clear, based on Senator Sanders' own record, that he has voted with the NRA, with the gun lobby, numerous times. He voted against the Brady bill 5 times. He voted for what we call the Charleston loophole. He voted for immunity from gun makers and sellers, which the NRA said was the most important piece of gun legislation in 20 years. He voted to let guns go onto Amtrak, guns go into national parks. He voted against doing research to figure out how we can save lives.
You know, Eugene, this was the part of the debate where, look, she had his record down cold,
she really
did. And he just struck, during this portion of the debate, this was Bernie Sanders, a guy who's been in Washington a long time trying to explain complicated votes.
Exactly. And one thing he wouldn't explain, he wouldn't really address, was the premise of the whole discussion, which is that he just changed his position on holding gun manufacturers liable, or rather legislation that has kept them from liability.
Giving them immunity from liability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he supported that, and all of a sudden now he doesn't support that. He was asked directly about that, and that's the one point. I mean, Bernie Sanders, his whole thing is, I'm a straight talker. No artifice. He's a straight talker. Yet on that issue, he was really not a straight talker.
No,
he never really acknowledged that. Yeah, I changed my position.
He sounds like just any old U.S. senator trying to defend some sort of issue.
Exactly.
All right.
Talk around it, but don't hit the point.
All right, now let me go over to my colleague, Kristen Welker. She is already here in the spin room right now, looking for campaigns, talking with the campaigns, seeing how they have done tonight. So, Kristen, I'm sure everybody feels as if they won tonight, but how are they saying they won?
Well, we are just watching some of the campaign officials walk into the room, Chuck, but I can tell you we've gotten blasts from the Clinton campaign throughout the night every time she makes one of these statements that you and Eugene have been discussing on health care, on guns. So they clearly feel as though she had a strong performance, and we're going to go and interview some of them in just a few minutes. But I want to go back to this point that you were discussing with Eugene, which is this strategy that we saw tonight from Secretary Clinton, really hugging President Obama and his policies in a more aggressive way than we have seen before, and trying to suggest that Bernie Sanders is not aligned with them on a number of these issues. The strategy behind that is that it helps to rally the Democratic base and also more diverse voters in a state like South Carolina, which could be critical if Secretary Clinton doesn't do well in Iowa or New Hampshire. Chuck?
All right. All right, Kristen, well, we shall see what they start saying. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to hear what some of the Republicans are saying about tonight's debate, going out to New Hampshire, where a lot of them are campaigning tonight. We'll be right back.
When Putin came back in the fall of 2011, it was very clear he came back with a mission. And I began speaking out as soon as that happened, because there were some fraudulent elections held and Russians poured out into the streets to demand their freedom. And he cracked down and, in fact, accused me of fomenting it. So we now know that he has a mixed record, to say the least. And we have to figure out how to deal with him.
What's your relationship with him?
Well, my relationship with him, it's interesting. It's it's one, I think, of respect. We've had some very tough dealings with one another. And I know that he's someone that you have to continually stand up to, because, like many bullies, he is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can unless you do.
Last week, Secretary Clinton called you, quote, a pretty reliable vote for the gun lobby. Right before the debate, you changed your position on immunity from lawsuits for gun manufacturers. Can you tell us why?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton knows that what she says is very disingenuous. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. I was in 1988. There were 3 candidates running for Congress in the state of Vermont. I stood up to the gun lobby and came out and maintained the position that in this country, we should not be selling military-style assault weapons. I have supported from day one an instant background check to make certain that people who should not have guns do not have guns.
Tonight's debate was not held in a Democratic Party vacuum. The Republicans were watching. Many of them were tweeting. The Republican Party even had a little gimmick that they tried to do here in Charleston. Well, let me check in with Hallie Jackson. She's in Manchester, New Hampshire. She's been covering the Republican side of this campaign for months. So, Hallie, what did you hear tonight from Republicans who were watching this debate?
And a couple of key takeaways here, Chuck. One of the big ones seemed to be just how far apart both parties are on the issues that are priorities to their base. In that first question, you heard the Democrats talk about strengthening the economy, improving health care access, uniting the divisions in this country. No mentions of national security, of ISIS, of the war on terror. And Republicans noticed. They quickly pounced. The GOP sending out a tweet highlighting that none of the Democrats brought up these topics. That is something that didn't get spoken about until over an hour into the debate. I wouldn't be surprised to hear some candidates on the campaign trail bring that up in their stump speeches over the next couple of days, trying to paint the Democrats as weak now on national security. Other big topics that we heard from candidates reacting tonight: gun control and health care, 2 areas of real distinction between the parties. You saw people like Marco Rubio tweeting out, and Rubio's tweet seemed to sum up the Republican reaction. 2 hours of this, imagine 4 years, he wrote. Rand Paul, who, by the way, didn't show up to the last Republican debate after he was relegated to undercard status, was live tweeting the Democratic debate, almost more visible this debate than he was for his own parties, tweeting, are they going to ask the Democrats tons of questions about Donald Trump, or is that just for us? Interestingly, Chuck, Trump was not a factor during this particular debate for the Democrats. Remember, the last Democratic debate, Hillary Clinton largely looked past her rivals on stage to talk about Trump. That was certainly not the case this time. And Trump himself was quiet on social media. He really didn't tweet about this at all. Jeb Bush did, taking aim at Hillary Clinton. And that was another theme that we saw from the Republicans tonight, trying to hit who they believe could be their potential general election contender. Chuck?
Well, Hallie, I thought you were right about summing it up. It really is. There is one focus that Democratic primary candidates are having, and it really is a discussion on a lot of domestic issues. And the Republican side really has become all about national security and immigration, and everything else seems to be down a notch. Anyway, Hallie, we'll check back in a little bit later. Thank you. Another big issue tonight was the issue of Wall Street. In this election, Bernie Sanders was on the attack while Hillary Clinton was on the defensive. Here's a little bit of that Wall Street exchange.
Can you really reform Wall Street when they are spending millions and millions of dollars on campaign contributions, and when they are providing speaker fees to individuals? So it's easy to say, well, I'm going to do this and do that. But I have doubts when people receive huge amounts of money from Wall Street.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
What I found fascinating there, Eugene, is that was the first time, Sanders had been a little bit kid gloves on Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, this was not kid gloves.
No, he went there on speaking fees.
He went there. He made it very personal.
Goldman Sachs speaking fees.
You've been taking hundreds of thousands of dollars speaker fees. $600,000 was the figure he mentioned in a year from Goldman Sachs. So he really, this is the point that he's emphasized on the campaign trail, his crusade against Wall Street, his belief that the system is rigged in favor that the big banks have to be broken up and Wall Street has to be brought to heel. And he clearly believes that Hillary Clinton disagrees.
And this was another moment where you saw Hillary Clinton wrap herself in Obama.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Dodd-Frank. And, oh, by the way, who did Dodd-Frank? President Obama.
I think it was Obama.
Yes, it was that. All right, let me bring in, we're going to be bringing in surrogates for all the campaigns. First one is up is Tad Devine. He's chief strategist for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Tad? I assume you thought your candidate did well. We always know that, so we'll get that. Let's get that over with. It was a different Bernie Sanders tonight. He was aggressive, and he went after Hillary Clinton on a lot of things. We just talked about Goldman Sachs. I'll be honest with you. I remember you saying a few months ago that that wasn't the type of campaign we'd be seeing. Why bring up speaking fees? Is that not a personal attack? Is that I was surprised from you guys.
You know, I think the Goldman Sachs settlement this week of $5 billion really did appall Bernie. And I think, you know, also, he's just decided there are big differences between he and Hillary Clinton. And we made an ad about it. People kind of went crazy over the ad. I mean, but I think it's a very straightforward thing. There's two different Democratic visions for what we're going to do about Wall Street. There's a Wall Street Democratic vision, and there's Bernie and, you know, others in the Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic Party who believes we need to take them on and we can't take their money and take them on at the same time. So I think it's a legitimate fight. He wanted to make it. I think he made it powerfully.
There was another issue on which they clashed, gun rights, in which Bernie, at least to my ears, and I think to everybody's ears, never really answered the question. Why did you change your position on immunity for gun rights?
Well, listen, he said a couple of months ago that he'd be open to look at it. Now, a piece of legislation came to him a couple of days ago. He said he's comfortable supporting it. He wants an amendment in it, an amendment that basically says we should protect mom and pop gun stores. Okay, and you know, change position. Listen, characterizing Bernie Sanders as a guy who's terrible on guns, which is what Hillary Clinton and her campaign is doing, is just not true. He's a D- NRA life-rated guy from a rural state. He has the best record of anybody in Vermont on that issue from the gun safety perspective.
But you know, it's interesting, Ted. Look, to my ear, you hear Bernie Sanders on every other issue. He wants to make big changes. He's ready to sort of break up big systems, this or that. On the gun issue, he sounded like another Washington politician.
Well, yeah, that's not what I heard. You know, listen, I know his record on guns. I know in 1988, when he ran for Congress for the first time, he lost that race, probably because he said he would support a ban on assault weapons. You know, I know he supported background checks since the early 90s. I know he's been strong on a lot of these things. Yeah, there's been a few issues with it and differences, but to try to take that and to say this guy is terrible on the issue is just a bridge too far. And I think that's why Hillary's attack on this is going nowhere.
Well, it's not necessarily saying he's terrible on the issue, but to say that he is out of step with the Democratic mainstream on this issue, I think that would be a fair thing to say.
I don't, and I'll tell you why, because he's got a record of voting for a number of common sense gun safety measures, like background checks, close the gun show loophole, get rid of the straw man provision. You know, he's got a lot of votes in his record, and I just think, you know, if he was, Howard Dean had an A rating, if he was the current governor of Vermont in an A rating, if he was other politicians from rural states and had A ratings, you know, Ted Strickland, okay, A+ rating, well, that would be fair, I get it, but I don't think it's going to stick to him because he has a lot of very strong votes when it comes to guns.
Let me ask you, though, where do you guys go from here? You know, when it comes to, it was clear that Hillary Clinton's strategy was wrap herself in President Obama.
Yes, I noticed that.
Right.
Yes.
But it does imply that you guys are you wanting to build upon President Obama's legacy, or does he want to change a lot of things? It seems like he thinks Dodd-Frank didn't work. He thinks like Obamacare didn't work. What is it?
You know, he does want to build on President Obama's legacy. He recognizes that the president came into office at a time when this country faced perhaps a second Great Depression, that the president had to lead us out of that, and he did. But Bernie wants to take us in a different direction. His policies are different. He believes health care is a right for all. We presented a plan for it. He believes, you know, his foreign policy, I think a lot of it, he's very similar to what President Obama does, and I think, frankly, Hillary Clinton is a lot more aggressive in a number of areas when it comes to military intervention, for example. So I think, yes, he wants to build on President Obama's policies, but Bernie wants to take us in a different direction, away from a party that's too beholden to Wall Street. He believes the economy is rigged, it sends too much wealth to the top, and is held in place by a corrupt system of campaign finance. That's our message.
You got it all in. Tad Devine, Chief Strategist for Senator Sanders. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Let me take you over to Kristen Welker right now. I believe she has one of the actual candidates who is on that stage, none other than former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley. Kristen, take it away.
I do indeed. Chuck, hi there. Governor O'Malley, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. How did you think the debate went? Do you think you broke through tonight in a way that you haven't in these past debates?
Well, every time we have one of these debates, we exceed expectations, and that's what you have to do as a challenger. So it's a rough format. They tell you up front, you know, that all of the questions are going to the front runners, and you have to jump in. But I thought we did a very good job tonight of laying out a vision for a new generation of leadership. Alone on that stage, I've actually gotten things done as an executive, whether it's health care, care or comprehensive gun safety legislation. And so I enjoyed tonight.
Let's talk about guns. That was one of the most heated moments of the debate. Your argument essentially to Secretary Clinton and to Senator Sanders was that they've both flip-flopped on this issue. Is that really fair? And do you think that you moved the needle in that argument in any way? And is Bernie Sanders in some ways being disingenuous by changing his mind on the issue yesterday?
Well, I think the reason we haven't gotten things done in Washington on this is because it was standard procedure for politicians, senators, congresspeople to kind of go back and forth on this issue. There's been no moral clarity on this in our Congress for a long time. So, yes, I believe it is true that Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders have both flip-flopped a lot on this issue. I have not. Since 2003, I've been advocating for a ban on combat assault weapons, and then alone on that stage, I'm the only one that actually got it done as a governor, and we didn't interrupt a single deer hunter's hunting season because of it.
But is that realistic given the current state of Congress to get a ban on assault weapons?
I believe it is. I believe we can't give up. And look, I laid out 7 different executive actions that I would take, and I'm heartened by the fact that President Obama has taken some of them. We have to keep moving towards this consensus and putting it together. You can't relent. You can't give up.
You and I are talking about health care. You say that you see Bernie Sanders' health care plan as a tax on the middle class. Did you need to be more aggressive on that point tonight to break through?
Well, I thought Secretary Clinton was being pretty aggressive on that.
But look, did you need to be more aggressive? You're the one who needs to see your poll numbers go up.
Yeah, well, look, I thought I was relentless and aggressive in talking about the fact that I've actually created a way to make the Affordable Care Act work that reduces hospital costs, that moves to global payments, and that was something I wasn't allowed to do by format in the last 2 debates. So I picked my moments. I didn't want to be part of their back and forth squabble, really. I'm a former mayor, I'm a former governor. I'm about getting things done and actually making things work. And that's what we're doing with health care. And the New England Journal of Medicine, in fact, did an article just 3 weeks ago saying, this is actually working. This is reducing costs. This is keeping people well. And this is what the future of health care could be.
And Governor O'Malley, let's talk about your broader campaign. Your polls are in the single digits. At what point, or do you reach a point when you say you're not seeing the increase that you need to see to stay in the race?
Well, I intend to let the people decide, especially the people of Iowa, where I've spent so much time, and then New Hampshire will decide. So that's what our democracy is all about. There are many candidates who have been where I am in the polls, and then the people of Iowa have a way of lifting up a new leader and introducing that person to the rest of the country. So I'm excited about caucus day, and I'm going to continue to let the people decide and trust their judgment.
And just finally, do you ever get daunted when you wake up and you see the poll numbers stuck there?
Yes, except that I've seen John Kerry, I've seen Jimmy Carter, I've seen many other candidates who are in a similar position. With total respect for you and your colleagues, you rarely ever get it right when it comes to calling what the outcome of the race is going to be. And the people of Iowa aren't going to be pushed around. They make up their own mind.
All right, Governor O'Malley, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.
Appreciate it. Chuck?
Thank you, Kristen. When we come back, we're going to hear from the Clinton campaign. None other than John Podesta, the chairman of the Clinton campaign, will join us to assess how he thinks his candidate did. We'll be right back.
You call yourself a democratic socialist, and throughout your career in politics, you've been critical of the Democratic Party, even saying in a book you wrote, quote, there wasn't a hell of a big difference between the 2 major parties. How will you win a general election labeling yourself a democratic socialist?
Because what I believe and what I was just saying, the Democratic Party needs major reform. To those of you in South Carolina, you know what, in Mississippi, we need a 50-state strategy, so that people in South Carolina and Mississippi can get the resources that they need. Instead of being dependent on super PACs, what we need is to be dependent on small individual campaign contributors. We need an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and low-income people.
The most recurring question I get when I stand on the chair all across Iowa and talk with my neighbors is, how are you going to heal the divisions and the wounds in our country? This is the biggest challenge we face as a people. All my life, I've brought people together over deep divides and very old wounds, and that's what we need now in a new leader. We cannot keep talking past each other, declaring all Republicans are our enemies, or the war is all about being against millionaires or billionaires, or it's all against American Muslims or all against immigrants. Look, as Frederick Douglass said, we are one, our cause is one, and we must help each other if we're going to succeed.
Well, joining me now is one of the moderators of tonight's debate, my good friend Andrea Mitchell. So, Andrea, take me on stage. What happened? What was it up there?
It was so stressful. You could feel the energy between those two candidates, you know, obviously Clinton and Sanders, because this race is so tight. And all of the anticipation with the fireworks we've seen on the campaign trail remotely came to a head, I think, when they were standing side by side.
Here's the part I love the most. What happened during the commercial breaks?
They went off. You know, they went off to their corners backstage. O'Malley was kind of schmoozing around, but they went off. I saw them.
I know. I saw him come up to you guys at one point. I'm like, uh-oh. I wonder if he's complaining about time.
No,
Usually candidates do that to the moderators.
He said, I wanted to say something about opiates.
Okay.
So, I mean, we covered, I think, a lot of substance.
It was a very substantive
I think
debate.
they felt good about that. And we didn't talk too much about Donald Trump.
Well, there you go.
It was a Democratic
it was a Democratic debate for Democratic primary voters. Just the way it's due, just like a Republican debate is for Republican.
And I do think that the fact that tomorrow's Martin Luther King Day, and that we're in Charleston, a block or two from Mother Emanuel, and it was the Congressional Black Caucus Institute as one of the sponsors. We wanted to talk about these issues of Black Lives Matter.
Could you feel the feelings in the room? I felt like the room had a favorite. And it was
hard for me to tell.
It was interesting.
Because you had the high shot.
A little bit, yeah. It was very interesting. I felt like the room certainly was more open to Hillary Clinton than anybody else. It was very interesting.
Well, she's got a lot of roots here, a lot of strength.
That's for sure. All right, we're going to check in with the Clinton campaign. I'm going to bring in the Secretary Clinton's campaign chair, John Podesta. Mr. Podesta, good to see you, sir.
Nice to be with you, Chuck.
A lot of pundits are saying this is the Bernie Sanders debate. Our friend Chris Eliza called him the winner, called you guys the loser, not because she did badly, but because the debate was so focused and the spotlight was on Sanders, partially because he did a lot of things you guys have been asking him to do, and he did them in the last 12 hours. He changed his vote changed his position on the gun immunity thing, put out a tax plan, put out a health care plan.
Well, look, I think he came in a little bit on the defensive because people are starting to finally look at both his record and his policies. And I think on the issue of guns, he did flip his position on liability. Secretary Clinton pressed him to do the same thing when it came to the Charleston loophole, the loophole that permitted the killer at Mother Emanuel to obtain that gun. He didn't go as far as he did on liability. I thought that he reacted to the issues that she had raised around health care and threw out a whole new health care plan tonight after introducing the same plan for 9 times over 20 years. So I think that, yes, he was doing a lot of talking, but he was doing a lot of explaining about both his record and his positions.
Do you feel like a night that while the debate may have been dominated by Bernie Sanders, you think that was a good thing for your campaign?
Yeah, I think it because, well, I think it opened up a lot of issues. I think that, again, Hillary was, I think, the only person on the stage that could really do all aspects of the job. I thought she absolutely dominated the foreign policy section. That was a smaller section of the debate. She talked very passionately on racial justice, and not only on criminal justice issues, but that close that she did on the racial disparities that we saw play out in Flint, and the passion that she brought to that, and the results that she gets when she puts her mind to it, I thought was really helpful.
How concerned are you about the resonance of his Wall Street attack mode and what he says about campaign finance reform? Do you think she's vulnerable on that? Because it seems to be picking up
speaking fees. I mean, he went right to speaking fees.
He went there, well, and you know, the young vote, the Iowa vote. I mean, he's tapping into something there.
Look, I think we need to reform our campaign finance system, and Hillary said that she would take an aggressive approach to that, appoint Supreme Court justices that would protect the right to vote and not the right of billionaires to buy elections, reverse the issues in Citizens United, have a wholly different approach, and also put forward serious campaign finance reform plans that would put campaign finance back in the hands of voters. When it comes to Wall Street, I think she pointed out something that was very important, which is he's painting with a very broad brush that includes many people who have tried to fight to rein in Wall Street, including the President of the United States, who took a lot of money from Wall Street in 2008, then turned right around and passed the most comprehensive Wall Street reform plan, the Dodd-Frank bill, when he came into office. So did Barney Frank. So I think that, and who's written about this. So I think you got to look at what people will actually do in office, as well as, I think it's fair for him to raise these issues, but the question is, what are the plans putting forward, and what will you do when you're in office? It's
fair to say that she wrapped herself in President Obama at times. I can't tell you how many times we had a whole sheet here of all the different times that she said, I'm going to build upon what President Obama started on here, and it was just.
Well, look, I think she wants to build. Is it fair to say she wants the third term? She wants to build on success. She wants to do some different things. She wants to get to some unfinished business, particularly raising wages, which have been stagnant even during his term, as he's pulled us out of the recession. And Senator Sanders has, I think, a different philosophy. I think he has, as she noted, suggested that someone primary against the president in 2011 as he was beginning to run for re-election. He's called him weak. So I think that he has a different view. He wants a more radical change from where we're going. I think she believes that the president's done a good job and wants to build on that success, build on the success, particularly of the Affordable Care Act. And, Bernie has different views.
How concerned are you about losing Iowa? How concerned are you about losing Iowa?
Look, I think we have a great organization there. We are going to, as she has said many times, fight for every vote. We believe we can win Iowa, and we will win Iowa. She's going there tomorrow, and we're going to fight to win the caucuses, and I think we're in a good position to do that.
All right, John Podesta, go get your winter coat.
Great.
It's a lot of Iowa time in the next couple of weeks. YouTube, of course, was a partner in tonight's debate with ourselves here at NBC News, and we heard from some interesting YouTube contributors during the debate. My pal Kristen Welker is with one of them right now. I believe it's Francesca Ramsey, a writer and actress who has her own YouTube channel. Kristen, take it away.
Hey there, Chuck. Thanks. Well, Francesca, thanks for being here. You, of course, asked that question about how would the candidates, if they were elected, make sure that instances of police violence be investigated fairly. What did you think of the reaction and the responses that you got?
Well, I really only got one response, and that was from Bernie Sanders, and I thought he did a really good job. He has a lot of passion. It's clear that he really cares about the issue, and I was so glad that he talked about the fact that there should be regulations for if someone dies in police custody, and that's something I would really like to see moving forward. I was disappointed that not everyone got to answer.
Was there anything that you wanted to hear him say that he didn't say?
No, I felt really good about his answer. You know, I think that we need to make sure that we have an impartial, group to come in and make sure that these instances are looked at in a fair way. And I think the Department of Justice is the way to go on those issues.
And tell me why this issue matters and resonates for you personally.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious as a black young woman, I have friends and family members and even myself, when we saw with Sandra Bland, where I worry at times that doing the right thing and being a law-abiding citizen really isn't enough if we live in a country where, unfortunately, people of color and black people are criminalized and seen as a threat, and then our lives are not taken seriously when and if something happens.
Now, I know you're still undecided in this primary. Did anything move the needle for you tonight? Who did you think had a really strong night?
I think I'm going to have to say that I felt that everyone did their best. I was a little disappointed that O'Malley didn't get to shine as much as I felt he should have or could have, but I'm still kind of open to the possibility of being moved in terms of moving one way or another, but I'm kind of keeping my vote to myself.
Okay, well, you are entitled to. Anything you didn't hear talked about tonight that you wanted to hear talked about or you'd like to hear the candidates address on the campaign trail moving forward?
I really think we need to talk a little bit more about LGBT issues. I think that, with the passing of same-sex marriage last year was a huge moment for us, but that's not the end when it comes to striving for equality for everyone. And so when it comes to issues for trans folk, I think that's really important. LGBT homeless youth is a really big issue that I'm really passionate about, and I hope that that's something that the candidates start thinking about moving forward.
Well, thank you for your question tonight during the debate, and thank you for your fantastic insights tonight. We really appreciate it. Francesca Ramsey. And Chuck, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Kristen. We'll be back in a moment. We're going to have more of the online reaction to tonight's debate. Plus, we'll be talking with our friends and experts over from Google. We'll be right back.
Where we disagree is the comments that Senator Sanders has made that don't just affect me, I can take that, but he's criticized President Obama for taking donations from Wall Street. And President Obama has led our country out of the Great Recession. Senator Sanders called him weak, disappointing. He even in 2011 publicly sought someone to run in a primary against President Obama. Now, I personally believe that President Obama's work to push through the Dodd-Frank bill and then to sign it was one of the most important regulatory schemes we've had since the 1930s. So I'm going to defend Dodd-Frank, and I'm going to defend President Obama for taking on Wall Street, taking on the financial industry, and getting results.
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care. And she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
Well, throughout the evening, we've been tracking reaction online, and helping us in that effort is Daniel Seberg over at the Google News Labs. Daniel joins me now. So Daniel, you know I'm a sort of a numbers geek. What do you got for me?
Hey Chuck, we got lots of numbers. We love numbers at Google. We've been tracking the data all night over the course of the debate, minute by minute, and we'll start with search interest around the candidates. And if we look at a national map, we can see that the highest number of searches were around Bernie Sanders, and you can see that across the country. So this is reflective of people wondering about maybe something he said, different policy issues and that kind of thing, but a pretty clear indicator of where a lot of the search interest went. We also found a lot of interest around Goldman Sachs as a trending term, a spiking term, if you will. In fact, at one point, it spiked about 758% over the 2 hours of the debate. We heard it come up in the course of Bernie Sanders talking about big banks, Hillary Clinton referencing it a number of times. So people wanting to know a little bit more about Goldman Sachs itself. And then we also saw a lot of search interest around Iran as a country that came up in the context of the nuclear accord. And people had some questions, and they turned to Google to get some clarity on that. So we saw things like, is Iran Sunni or Shia? Why are we giving Iran money? Is Iran now able to join the world economy? Just some of the questions that people had as they heard it mentioned during the course of the debate. And then finally, gun control, we know, was a big topic over the course of the entire debate, and we saw spikes with both candidates. I should say all three candidates, but primarily when we're talking about Hillary Clinton, we could see a 200% spike over the course of the 3 hours. And then with Bernie Sanders, we saw a slightly higher increase at about 350% over the course of those 3 hours. Just some of the trending terms, of course, healthcare was in there, some issues around the economy. All of this data available at google.com/trends if the data geeks out there like you and me want to dive into it even further.
Daniel, I can't get over your map. You were showing the candidates and you had all these nice colors. Bernie Sanders was purple and the whole country was purple. I mean, that says a lot right there. I mean, I go back there. Not a single state where either Clinton or O'Malley topped Sanders in interest. Is that the best way to look at that in Google searching interest by state?
That is how to look at it. Hard to know, looking at that map, how much more search interest there was for Bernie Sanders, depending on which state. But certainly if you look at the map nationally, that was the most amount of search data was around Bernie Sanders. For whatever reason, again, it could be whether people agreed with what he said or not.
Could be positive or negative,
but people
right?
certainly had a lot of search interest. Yep, exactly.
All right. Daniel, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, right here in Charleston, as many know, what happened in this city exactly 7 months ago is still very fresh. And it's a very fresh memory for this community. A race-motivated white gunman first went and prayed and then shot and killed 9 African Americans during a Bible study meeting at the historical Emmanuel African American Methodist Episcopal Church. One of the steady voices in the days after the tragedy was that of Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, and he joins the table right now. Congressman, always good to see you, sir.
Oh, thank you so much for
having me. Thank you for hosting us. It's great
Thanks
to be
for
here
coming. I appreciate it.
You're still neutral in this race, I believe?
Yes.
And you plan on staying neutral, and how long will you stay neutral?
I don't know. You know, I made a promise to the National Party that I would stay out of it if they were to give South Carolina this spot.
The early spot here?
Yeah. And so I've kept that promise thus far. But with each passing day, I'm getting more and more emotionally involved in this discussion.
Okay, well, all right then.
And I'm not going to
You're getting emotionally involved with?
Yes. Well, with the whole campaign, you know, I'm very concerned about the future. I have a new grandson, and I'm thinking about what this country is going to be like for him. Of course, I got two grandkids in college, and I'm thinking about what graduation is going to be for them and what will they find after graduating. And I'm just getting a little more emotionally involved.
So what did you think up there? Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. Look, this is a two-candidate race. Yeah. It's clear from the polls, with no disrespect to Governor O'Malley, but I think we've seen what happened. Who do you feel like got the upper hand tonight?
Oh, I don't think either one of them got the upper hand. I think on foreign policy issues, it's clear that Hillary is far advanced Bernie on that issue. On the domestic side, income inequality, these issues that are burning at people, I think Bernie acquitted himself very well with those issues. But I would say neither one of them hurt themselves tonight.
Okay.
And here in South Carolina, people have talked about how Bernie Sanders is doing so well in Iowa, obviously ahead in New Hampshire, and that this is her firewall. He has some traction in Nevada with the unions as well, another caucus state, but when he comes down here to South Carolina, she has to do well, and she's reportedly, you know, so far ahead. What's happening with him here, though, in his attempt? He's working so hard to try to build his credibility with African Americans in particular, and with South Carolinian Democrats.
Well, at the moment, this is a firewall for her, no question about that. She's way ahead in South Carolina. But as happened in 2008, Iowa can change that dynamic very quickly. If it's close in Iowa and New Hampshire, she could lose both those states and not get hurt badly. In fact, it doesn't even have to be close in New Hampshire if it's close in Iowa. If it's a blowout, I mean, a 10-point loss
in Iowa.
It would redefine the race.
What do you mean by redefine the race?
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What do you mean by redefine the race?
I mean, that South Carolina could do this year what it did in 2008.
How's her organization here? She needs it as a
She's
firewall.
got a good organization.
Is it a good organization?
Oh,
Is it built for a firewall?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's not built for a blowout.
Very interesting.
And how's his organization here?
Good. It's much better than I thought it was 2 weeks ago. What I found since I've been home on this break is that he's doing well.
Here's what I just figured out. I'm not playing poker with Congressman Jim Clyburn. I cannot read your face. I have tried to see, and I think he's leaning there. No, he's leaning there. All I know is you're a pretty good poker player, sir.
Well, I hope so. I don't. I can't count too well, so I don't play poker.
All right.
Yeah.
Congressman Jim Clyburn, good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your hospitality.
We are here. We are also watch this debate with a group of Iowa voters. They are in Urbandale, Iowa, a suburb outside of Des Moines. One of our embeds, Danny Freeman, is with them tonight. So, Danny, it's an informal focus group. We're not going to pretend that this was, all this gathered. But look, we know we gathered a bunch of Iowa Democrats. What did you hear tonight? What did you learn from them?
Well, we had a lot of differing views here tonight, Chuck, but it was an enthusiastic crowd in Urbandale, as you said. And remember, tomorrow marks 2 weeks toward the Iowa caucuses. So this is the time when all of these Iowans are really starting to pay attention. So I have a few right here, and I'm going to ask you a quick question. First, on the issue of guns. You know, this is a topic that went back and forth. Suzette, right to you first. Clinton attacked Sanders on guns and really laid out a list of his policies that she maybe didn't agree with. How did you feel that played for Clinton?
Well, I think it played pretty well for Clinton. She's obviously very knowledgeable on the issue, probably much more knowledgeable than I am. So did it hurt Bernie? I don't think so.
Gotcha. So then another issue that was that came up was Sanders passing on attacking Clinton on the issue of Bill. He brought up Sanders' comments from a few weeks ago. How do you think that made Sanders look? This is the third debate that he has taken a pass at, really going after her hard. Adam, what did you think?
I mean, like I said, Democrats in general, they look at the issues as compared to the Republican Party. They just, really were looking at changing, bringing up issues that matter to people. And it comes down to, people don't care about the individual issues of attacking and what media can do and try to make it change and twist the story.
All right, I appreciate that, Adam. Now, again, you have a number of undecided, but definitely likely Democratic caucus goers here. They had a great time, and the one thing that they did say is that a lot of them wished Martin O'Malley had more time to talk. Back to you, Chuck.
Well, I think Martin O'Malley would agree with him there anyway. Danny Freeman, great job there. One of our embeds in Iowa. I'll be seeing you soon, getting my winter coat ready for the final sprint. We'll be back in a moment. We'll have the chair of the Democratic Party right here. Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, stay with us.
This is the first time that a spouse of a former president could be elected president. You have said that President Clinton would advise you on economic issues, but be specific if you can. Are you talking about a kitchen table role on economics, or will he have a real policy role?
Well, it'll start at the kitchen table. We'll see how it goes from there. And I'm going to have the very best advisors that I can possibly have. And when it comes to the economy and what was accomplished under my husband's leadership in the 90s, especially when it came to raising incomes for everybody and lifting more people out of poverty than at any time in recent history, you bet I'm going to ask for his ideas, I'm going to ask for his advice, and I'm going to use him as a goodwill emissary to go around the country to find the best ideas we've got.
Over the long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, "Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground." We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
And we're back here in Charleston, wrapping up our post-debate coverage. We're joined by the chairwoman of the Democratic Party, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who represents Broward County.
Yes.
Congresswoman. And Madam Chairman.
Miami-Dade County.
You do have a piece of
I
Miami-Dade.
do.
I know, even though you're a Broward gal. You know. All right, straightforward. How'd you feel like this debate went as far as the Democratic Party is concerned?
You know, for the Democratic Party, we put our best foot forward tonight. We had 3 candidates really show why they deserve any one of them to be commander-in-chief. Focused on the issues that are important to Americans, drew a dramatic contrast between the food fight that they had on the Republican stage on Thursday night. Republicans continue to double down on, who they're going to deport and who can deport them faster, on which religion they're going to bar from entering the country based on who they are. Our candidates talked about how to make sure people could get good access to health care, good education.
Were you nervous at all that they were getting a little too, this is the first debate where they went at each other a little bit. Were you a little nervous that it was going to get too harsh?
It's a debate.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So you don't mind it?
No, especially because they stuck to the issues. They drew maybe sharper points on how they'd approach different issues, but it was really substantive.
And Jim Clyburn just told Chuck that if Bernie Sanders has a blowout in Iowa, it's going to redefine the race here in South Carolina the way it did in 08.
Well, I think that we are going to continue to have a robust and spirited primary, and it's going to be competitive, for a little while. And once the voting starts, like every election cycle, we'll see what happens.
All right, I have to leave it there.
That's okay.
Because our marathon coverage is finally coming to an end. Madam Chairwoman, thanks for coming on here. Andrea Mitchell, terrific job. You and Lester was wonderful. This was a very spirited Democratic debate, as you saw. Some contrasts were being drawn. It was a large focus on Bernie Sanders. It was Hillary Clinton wrapping herself a bit in President Obama. The march to Iowa now begins. 15 days, 2 weeks from tomorrow, are the Iowa Democratic caucuses. You're going to be able to watch all of this on NBC and MSNBC. I'm Chuck Todd in Charleston. For all of my colleagues at NBC News and MSNBC, have a good night.